"You're fired." Two words that shattered everything. Ethan Cole had saved a stranger's life in a rainstorm just 12 hours earlier, soaked, exhausted, choosing compassion over convenience. Now he stood in the crowded diner, humiliated in front of everyone, his manager's cruel laughter echoing off the walls. But what Craig Dalton didn't know was that the old man in the corner booth, the one watching with steel gray eyes, owned everything, and justice was about to walk through that door. Stay until the end and comment what city you're watching from. Let's see how far this story travels. The rain came down like God had opened a faucet and forgotten to turn it off. Ethan Cole's windshield wipers thrashed back and forth in a losing battle against the deluge, their rhythmic squeak thump the only sound competing with the drumming on his truck's metal roof. Lightning cracked across the Cincinnati sky, illuminating the world in brief, violent flashes of white before plunging everything back into darkness. His hands gripped the steering wheel so tight his knuckles had gone pale. The clock on his dashboard, the only thing in this 1998 Ford that still worked reliably, glowed 11:47 p.m. in sickly green numbers. Come on," Ethan muttered, leaning forward as if those extra 3 inches would help him see through the curtain of water. His back screamed from the double shift he'd just pulled at the Riverside Griddle Diner. Breakfast rush starting at 5 a.m., straight through to the dinner crowd, with only a 20-minute break to scarf down a sandwich and call Mrs. Chen to make sure Mason had eaten his vegetables. His son. 6 years old, probably asleep by now in their cramped apartment 3 miles ahead, his small body curled around the stuffed bear Sarah had given him before. Ethan's jaw clenched. Don't go there. Not tonight. The road stretched ahead, slick and black as oil, reflecting his headlights in wavering pools. Route 50 was usually busy, even this late, but the storm had driven everyone sensible indoors. Only fools and desperate men were out in weather like this. Ethan qualified as both. His phone buzzed in the cup holder. He glanced down. Mrs. Chen, probably checking in. The elderly Korean woman who lived 2 doors down had become his lifeline over the past 3 years. Watching Mason when Ethan's shifts ran long, never asking for more than $20 and whatever leftovers he could bring home from the diner. He'd call her back when he got home. Just 10 more minutes. 10 more minutes and he could collapse into bed, grab maybe 5 hours of sleep before his alarm screamed him awake for another opening shift. That's when he saw it. At first, it was just a shape on the side of the road, a dark mass that didn't belong. Ethan's foot moved instinctively toward the brake, his body responding before his mind fully processed what his eyes were seeing. A car. Expensive, from what he could tell. One of those luxury sedans that cost more than Ethan made in 3 years. It sat half on the shoulder, half on the road, completely dead. No hazard lights, no headlights, just a dark hulk waiting to cause an accident. And beside it, barely visible in the rain, a figure. An old man standing in the downpour like a statue, one hand resting on the car's hood as if that could somehow bring it back to life. Ethan's foot hovered between the brake and the gas pedal. Keep driving, a voice in his head urged. Not your problem. You've got your own issues. Mason's waiting. You're exhausted. The rent's due in 4 days and you're still short $200. The old man turned slightly, and in the next flash of lightning, Ethan saw his face, pale, water streaming down weathered features, eyes looking lost in a way that had nothing to do with directions. Someone stopped for Sarah. The thought hit him like a punch to the sternum. Someone must have stopped for Sarah that night. Someone pulled over, called 911, stayed with her while she... Ethan's foot slammed on the brake. The truck fishtailed slightly on the wet asphalt before jerking to a stop on the shoulder about 30 feet ahead of the sedan. For a moment, Ethan just sat there, both hands on the wheel, watching the rain hammer his windshield, asking himself what the hell he was doing. Then he grabbed his denim jacket from the passenger seat, not that it would do much good, and pushed open the door. The rain hit him like a physical force, instantly soaking through his work shirt, plastering his brown hair to his forehead. The cold was shocking, stealing his breath. "Hey!" Ethan called out, jogging back toward the figure. "You okay?" The old man turned, and up close, Ethan could see he was in his 70s, maybe 80s. He wore what had probably been an expensive suit that morning, 3-piece, charcoal gray, but now it hung on his thin frame like a wet paper bag. His white hair, probably neatly combed earlier, was matted to his skull. "My car," the old man said, his voice thin and trembling. Not from fear, Ethan realized, but from cold. The man was shaking so hard his words came out stuttered. "It just stopped. The lights, everything. I called for help, but my phone died. And Okay, it's okay," Ethan interrupted, stepping closer. Rain ran down his face, into his eyes, but he kept them locked on the old man. "How long have you been out here?" I'm not." The old man looked around as if seeing the storm for the first time. "Maybe an hour, maybe more. I thought someone would stop, but the cars just kept—" "Jesus," Ethan breathed. "An hour in this?" The man had to be hypothermic. "Come on, we need to get you warm. My truck's right there." He reached for the old man's arm, but the stranger pulled back slightly. "My car, I can't just leave." "Your car's not going anywhere tonight," Ethan said firmly, "and neither are you if you stay out here. Come on." This time, when Ethan took his arm, the old man didn't resist. He felt impossibly fragile through the wetsuit jacket, like bird bones wrapped in cloth. Ethan had to practically carry him the 30 feet to the truck, the old man's legs barely cooperating, his dress shoes slipping on the wet pavement. Ethan wrenched open the passenger door and helped the man inside, then ran around to the driver's side. When he climbed in, both of them dripping and gasping, the cab felt like a sanctuary. Okay, Ethan said, cranking the heat up to maximum. The vent sputtered and wheezed. The heater was about as reliable as everything else in this truck, but warm air eventually began to trickle out. He grabbed his jacket from where he'd dropped it on the seat and draped it over the old man's shoulders. "Thank you," the man whispered. His teeth were chattering so hard Ethan could hear them clicking together. "Thank you. I didn't think anyone would stop." "Yeah, well," Ethan said, pulling back onto the road, "it's not a night to be stranded." He glanced over at his passenger, who had pulled the jacket tighter around himself and was leaning toward the heating vent like a plant seeking sun. In the dim light from the dashboard, Ethan could see the man's lips had a bluish tinge. This was bad. This was really bad. "I'm taking you to my place," Ethan said, making the decision even as the words left his mouth. "It's close, and you need to get into dry clothes. We can figure out your car situation after you're warmed up." "I couldn't possibly impose." "You're not imposing. You're accepting help. There's a difference." Ethan took the turn onto Maple Street a bit too fast, the truck's tires spraying water. "I'm Ethan, by the way. Ethan Cole." "Walter," the old man said after a pause. "Walter Briggs." They drove in silence for a few minutes. The only sounds, the rain, the struggling heater, and Walter's gradually slowing shivers. Ethan's mind was racing ahead, cataloging what he had at home. Clean clothes. Well, his stuff would swim on this guy, but at least they'd be dry. Food. Leftover soup from 2 days ago. Maybe some bread that wasn't too stale. Mrs. Chen would probably have Mason in bed by now, which was good. The kid didn't need to wake up to a stranger in their living room at midnight. "Here we are," Ethan announced, pulling into the cracked parking lot of Riverside Gardens Apartments, a name that was aspirational at best. The building was a 4-story brick structure that had probably been nice in the 1970s, but now looked tired and worn. Half the exterior lights were burned out, and the lobby door hung slightly crooked on its hinges. "Third floor," Ethan said, helping Walter out of the truck. "No elevator, I'm afraid." "I can manage," Walter said, but Ethan kept a hand under his elbow anyway as they climbed the stairs. The old man's breathing was labored by the second flight, and Ethan found himself bearing more and more of his weight. The apartment door was at the end of a hallway that smelled like cooking oil and carpet that needed replacing. Ethan juggled Walter's weight and his keys, finally getting the door open and guiding the old man inside. "It's not much," Ethan said, flipping on the lights. The small living room sprang into view, worn couch that he'd found on Craigslist, coffee table with one wobbly leg, TV that was older than Mason. But it was clean, at least. Ethan made sure of that. A door to the left opened, and Mrs. Chen's round face peered out, her gray hair in curlers. "Ethan, is everything—" She stopped, taking in the soaked, shivering old man. "Oh my." "Hi, Mrs. Chen. Sorry if we woke you. This is Walter. His car broke down and he needs a place to warm up. Is Mason sleeping like a rock? Mrs. Chen said, already moving into action. She disappeared back into Mason's room and emerged with an armful of blankets. You get him into dry clothes. I'll make tea. You don't have to. Shush. She was already heading into the kitchen, which was barely separated from the living room by a breakfast bar. Ethan guided Walter to the couch and sat him down. Stay right here. I'll get you something dry to wear. He ducked into his bedroom, barely bigger than a closet, and rummaged through his dresser. The best he could come up with was an old pair of gray sweatpants and a Cincinnati Bengals sweatshirt he'd bought at a thrift store. Not exactly luxury, but they were clean and warm. When he returned to the living room, Mrs. Chen had already draped a blanket around Walter's shoulders and was pressing a mug of hot tea into his trembling hands. Bathroom's through there, Ethan said, pointing to a door beside the kitchen. You can change and just toss your wet stuff on the floor. We'll deal with it in the morning. Walter took the clothes with shaking hands. You're very kind, both of you. I don't know how to thank. Just get changed before you catch pneumonia, Ethan said. When the bathroom door closed, Mrs. Chen turned to Ethan, her dark eyes sharp. You have a big heart, she said quietly. Just like your Sarah. Ethan's throat tightened. I should pay you for watching Mason so late. Tomorrow. She patted his wet arm. I'm going back to bed. You take care of your guest. After she left, Ethan peeled off his own soaked shirt and grabbed a dry one from the bedroom. He was toweling his hair when Walter emerged from the bathroom, swimming in Ethan's clothes, his wetsuit draped over one arm. He looked smaller somehow, more fragile, but his color was better. The dangerous blue tinge had faded from his lips. Sit, Ethan said, taking the wet clothes and draping them over the backs of chairs. I'm going to heat up some soup. Nothing fancy, just chicken noodle, but it'll help warm you up from the inside. I don't want to be any trouble. You're not trouble. You're company. Ethan was already pulling the container of soup from the refrigerator, dumping it into a pot. When's the last time you ate? Walter had to think about it. Breakfast, I think. I had a meeting in Cincinnati, and I was driving back to Columbus when the car just died. Columbus? Ethan glanced over his shoulder. That's 2 hours from here. I know. Walter wrapped the blanket tighter around himself. I should have left earlier, but the meeting ran long, and I thought I could make it before the storm hit. The soup began to simmer, filling the small apartment with a comforting smell. Ethan stirred it, watching the noodles swirl. You got family in Columbus? He asked. Someone we should call to let them know you're okay? A pause. When Ethan looked back, Walter's expression had gone distant. No, the old man said quietly. No family. Not anymore. Something in those words resonated in Ethan's chest. He knew that particular flavor of loneliness. Yeah, he said softly. I get that. He poured the soup into a bowl, one of a set of 4 he'd bought at Target when he and Sarah had first moved in together, back when they were young and broke and so stupidly happy it hurt to remember. He set it in front of Walter along with a spoon and some crackers. Eat. I'll see if I can find information about 24-hour towing in this weather. But when Ethan pulled out his phone and started searching, the results weren't promising. Most towing companies weren't operating in the storm, and the ones that were had wait times of 4 to 6 hours. Looks like your car's spending the night where it is, Ethan said. I'll drive you out there first thing in the morning. The diner opens at 5, but I can drop you off before my shift. Walter looked up from his soup, his spoon halfway to his mouth. You work at 5 in the morning? 5 a.m. opening shift, yeah. Usually work until 2 or 3 in the afternoon. Ethan shrugged. The joys of restaurant work. Every day? 6 days a week, sometimes 7 if someone calls in sick. Ethan tried to keep his tone light, but exhaustion bled through. It's not bad. The tips are decent, and my manager gives me the best sections most days. That wasn't entirely true. Craig Dalton gave him the worst sections on purpose, the tables by the kitchen where nobody wanted to sit. But Ethan had learned to work twice as hard as everyone else, to smile wider, to make customers feel like they were his only priority. It was the only way to make enough money to keep the lights on and food in Mason's belly. You have a child, Walter said. It wasn't a question. A son. Mason. He's 6. Ethan couldn't help the smile that crossed his face. Obsessed with dinosaurs right now, specifically velociraptors. I've heard more facts about Cretaceous period predators than I ever thought possible. He's lucky to have a father who works so hard for him. The words hit Ethan harder than they should have. He turned away, pretending to wipe down the counter that was already clean. I'm lucky to have him, he said quietly. After my wife died 3 years ago, he's been my reason to keep going. My reason to work the double shifts and eat ramen so he can have the good cereal. You do what you have to do for your kids, you know? The apartment fell quiet except for the rain still hammering against the windows and the occasional scrape of Walter's spoon against his bowl. I had a son once, Walter said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. Thomas. He'd be about your age now, if he'd lived. Ethan turned back. Walter was staring into his soup, his weathered hands wrapped around the bowl like it could anchor him. Cancer, Walter continued. He was 12. That was 35 years ago, but some days it feels like yesterday. His mother, she never recovered. We stayed together another 10 years, but the grief was like a wall between us. Eventually, we admitted we were just 2 people living in the same house, haunted by the same ghost. I'm sorry, Ethan said, and meant it. He pulled out one of the mismatched chairs and sat down across from Walter. I can't imagine. You don't think you'll survive it, Walter said, his gaze distant. When it first happens, you don't think it's possible to keep breathing, to keep existing in a world that's missing such a vital piece, but somehow you do. You wake up the next morning, and the morning after that, and eventually you realize you've built a whole life around the hole they left behind. Ethan nodded slowly. Sarah died in a car accident. Drunk driver ran a red light. She was coming home from her night class. She was working on her nursing degree. His voice cracked slightly. Mason was 3, old enough to remember her, which I'm grateful for. But sometimes I wonder if it would be easier for him if he didn't. If he wouldn't miss what he doesn't remember. You don't mean that. No, Ethan admitted. I don't. They sat in companionable silence, 2 men who understood loss in the way only those who've experienced it can. Outside, the storm began to ease slightly, the drumming rain softening to a steady patter. You should get some rest, Ethan said finally. You can take my bed. I'll crash on the couch. Absolutely not. You've done more than enough. The couch is perfect. Ethan wanted to argue, but the truth was he was so tired his bones ached, and he had to be up in less than 5 hours. Okay, he conceded. But if you need anything, water, another blanket, whatever, you wake me up. Got it? Got it. Ethan fetched another blanket and a pillow that had seen better days. As he was arranging them on the couch, Walter spoke again. Why did you stop? Ethan paused. What? Tonight. In the storm. Why did you stop? Walter's gray eyes were sharp, curious. You were exhausted. You have a son waiting at home. You could have driven past like everyone else did. Why didn't you? Ethan was quiet for a long moment, the question hanging in the air between them. Finally, he said, because someone stopped for my wife. That night, when she was dying on the side of the road, someone pulled over. Someone stayed with her, held her hand, called 911. They told me later that she wasn't alone at the end. That mattered to me more than I can say. He swallowed hard. I guess I figured, if someone showed my Sarah that kindness, the least I could do was pay it forward. Wherever she is, I hope she knows I tried. Walter's eyes had gone bright with unshed tears. She knows, he said hoarsely. I promise you, she knows. Ethan nodded, not trusting his voice. He handed Walter the pillow. Good night, Walter. Try to get some sleep. Good night, Ethan, and thank you for everything. Ethan retreated to his bedroom, closing the door softly behind him. He stripped off his jeans and collapsed onto the bed, still wearing his t-shirt and boxers. He should set his alarm. He should check on Mason. He should do 100 things. Instead, he closed his eyes and was asleep in seconds. The alarm screamed at 4:15 a.m. Ethan slapped at it blindly, his brain sluggish and resistant to consciousness. For a moment, he couldn't remember why he was so much more exhausted than usual, why every muscle felt like it had been wrung out. Then he remembered. The storm. The old man. Walter. He dragged himself out of bed and pulled on his work clothes, black slacks, white button-down shirt, black shoes that were developing a hole in the left sole. In the bathroom, he splashed cold water on his face and ran a comb through his hair, trying to look like someone who had gotten more than 4 hours of sleep. When he emerged, he found Walter already awake, sitting on the couch with the blanket wrapped around his shoulders, staring out the window where dawn was just beginning to paint the sky in shades of gray. "Morning," Ethan said quietly. "How'd you sleep?" "Better than I have in months," Walter admitted. "Your couch is more comfortable than it looks." Ethan smiled. "High praise. Listen, I've got to get to work, but let me make us some coffee and toast, then I'll drive you to your car." "You don't have to—" "Walter." Ethan fixed him with a look. "We already had this conversation. Stop trying to be less trouble than you are and just accept the help, okay?" A small smile cracked Walter's weathered face. "Okay?" They had a quick breakfast, toast with peanut butter and coffee that Ethan made strong enough to strip paint. As they ate, Mason's door opened and a small figure emerged, rubbing his eyes. "Daddy?" "Hey, buddy." Ethan opened his arms and Mason shuffled over, still half asleep, and climbed into his lap. "Sorry I wasn't here when you went to bed last night. I had to help someone." Mason blinked at Walter, suddenly more alert. "Who's that?" "This is Mr. Briggs. His car broke down in the rain, so he slept here." "Oh." Mason considered this. "We learned about helping people in school. Mrs. Patterson says it's important." "Mrs. Patterson's right," Ethan said, dropping a kiss on his son's messy brown hair. "You going to be okay with Mrs. Chen this morning?" "Uh-huh. She said we could make pancakes." "Lucky you." Ethan glanced at the clock. 4:45 a.m. "Okay, I need to go. You be good, and I'll see you this afternoon." "Okay, Daddy." Mason scrambled off his lap and headed toward Mrs. Chen's door, then paused and turned back to Walter. "I hope your car gets fixed." "Thank you, young man," Walter said solemnly. "That's very kind." After Mason disappeared into Mrs. Chen's apartment, Ethan and Walter headed out. The morning was cool and clean, the storm having washed the world fresh. Puddles dotted the parking lot, reflecting the pale sky. The drive back to Route 50 was quiet, both men lost in their own thoughts. When they reached the spot where Walter's car still sat, dead and alone on the shoulder, Ethan pulled over behind it. In the daylight, Ethan could see it was a Mercedes. A really, really nice Mercedes. The kind that cost more than Ethan would make in 5 years. "Okay," Ethan said. "I've got about 10 minutes before I absolutely have to leave, or I'll be late. Let's see if we can figure out what's wrong." But it quickly became clear that whatever had killed the car was beyond a simple fix. The engine wouldn't even turn over. No lights, no sounds, nothing. "Looks like you're going to need a tow," Ethan said, straightening up and wiping his hands on his pants. "I can call the company I found last night, or—" "I'll handle it," Walter said. He'd changed back into his suit, which Ethan had run through the dryer that morning. It was wrinkled but dry. "You've done more than enough. You need to get to work." Ethan hesitated. Leaving Walter here on the side of the road felt wrong, even in daylight. "Are you sure? I could—" "Ethan," Walter placed a hand on his shoulder. "I'll be fine. I promise. The tow truck will be here within the hour, and I'll be back in Columbus by lunchtime." "Okay." Ethan pulled out his wallet and extracted a crumpled business card from the diner. "Here, this has my number on it. Call me when you get home safe, okay? Just so I know you made it." Walter took the card, studying it carefully. "The Riverside Griddle Diner," he read. Then he looked up at Ethan, something unreadable in his gray eyes. "I'll call. I promise." They shook hands, and then Ethan was back in his truck, pulling onto Route 50, watching Walter shrink in his rearview mirror. He made it to the diner with 3 minutes to spare. The Riverside Griddle was a fixture on Cincinnati's East Side, a chrome and vinyl throwback to the 1950s that somehow still hung on, despite every chain restaurant trying to put it out of business. The sign out front was vintage neon, when it worked, and the interior was all red vinyl booths and checkerboard floors. Ethan pushed through the door, the bell chiming overhead, and immediately clocked the morning crew. Jenny at the register, already looking harried, Miguel in the kitchen, firing up the griddles, and Craig Dalton leaning against the counter with his arms crossed, a scowl on his face. "Nice of you to join us, Cole," Craig said. He was a man in his early 40s who wore his assistant manager title like a general's rank, his dark hair slicked back, his white shirt always perfectly pressed. "Cutting it a bit close, aren't we?" "I'm here, aren't I?" Ethan grabbed an apron from the hook and tied it around his waist. "Clock says 4:58. "Clock says 4:59 now. 1 more minute and you'd have been written up." Ethan bit back the dozen responses that wanted to come flying out. Craig had been on his case for months now, ever since Ethan had politely declined to laugh at one of Craig's racist jokes. The man was petty, vindictive, and the only reason he had any authority was because the owner, whoever that was, Ethan had never met them, was apparently an absentee landlord who let Craig run the place however he wanted. "Well, crisis averted," Ethan said lightly. "I'll take Section 3. "You'll take Section 1, Craig corrected. "By the kitchen." Of course. The worst section in the place, where the tables were cramped and the constant swinging door meant customers got bumped by servers carrying hot plates. The section where people rarely sat unless the place was packed, which meant poor tips. "Sure thing," Ethan said, refusing to give Craig the satisfaction of seeing him upset. The morning rush started at 6 and didn't let up until almost 10. Ethan worked his section with practiced efficiency, smiling at grumpy customers, remembering drink orders, keeping the coffee flowing. His feet ached and his back screamed, but he kept moving. Around 9:30, during a brief lull, his phone buzzed in his pocket. He ducked into the back hallway and checked it. A text from an unknown number. "Made it home safe. Walter." Ethan smiled, typing back, "Glad to hear it. Take care of yourself." The response came immediately. "You too." And Ethan, "Thank you. You saved my life last night. I won't forget it." Before Ethan could respond, Craig's voice cut through the diner. "Cole, table 6 needs their check. Today would be nice." Ethan pocketed his phone and got back to work. He had no idea that the old man he'd rescued from the rain was, at that very moment, making a phone call that would change everything. He had no idea that Walter Briggs wasn't just some random stranger. And he definitely had no idea that tomorrow Justice would walk through the diner's door wearing a tailored suit and steel gray eyes. But tonight, as Ethan finally clocked out at 3 p.m. and drove home to pick up Mason from school, he felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Like maybe the universe wasn't entirely cruel. Like maybe kindness still mattered. Like maybe, just maybe, doing the right thing was its own reward. He was about to discover he was more right than he knew, but in ways he never could have imagined. The next morning started the same way. Every morning started for Ethan Cole, with the alarm screaming at 4:15 a.m. and his body protesting every movement. He rolled out of bed, his muscles still sore from yesterday's double shift, and went through the motions on autopilot. Shower, dress, check on Mason sleeping peacefully in his room, grab his keys, and head out into the pre-dawn darkness. The drive to the Riverside Griddle took 15 minutes on a good day. This morning, his truck decided to make things interesting by stalling at the first red light. "Come on, baby. Not today," Ethan muttered, turning the key. The engine coughed, sputtered, and finally caught. He pressed the gas pedal gently, nursing it through the intersection like a sick patient. The truck had been on its last legs for 6 months now, held together by duct tape and prayer. Ethan knew he needed to replace it, but that would require money he didn't have. Every dollar went to rent, food, Mason's school supplies, the electric bill, the water bill, the never-ending parade of expenses that came with keeping a 6-year-old alive and healthy. He'd been saving $30 here, $20 there, in a coffee can hidden in the back of his closet. Last count, he had about $400. Maybe enough for a down payment on something that wouldn't break down every other week. Maybe. The truck stalled again at the next light. "No, no, no," Ethan said, his heart starting to race. He turned the key. Nothing. Just a clicking sound that made his stomach drop. "Please, please start." Click, click, click. He tried again and again. On the 5th try, the engine grudgingly turned over, coughing black smoke from the exhaust. Ethan didn't care. It was running. That's all that mattered. But now he was running late. He pushed the truck as hard as he dared, watching the speedometer creep up to 45 in a 35 zone. Not enough to get pulled over, he hoped, but enough to make up some time. The rain from 2 nights ago had left everything damp and gray, the morning sky a flat sheet of clouds that promised more weather to come. Ethan's wipers squeaked across the windshield, smearing the light drizzle into streaks. When he pulled into the diner's parking lot, the dashboard clock read 5:07 a.m., 7 minutes late. "Damn it," Ethan breathed. He killed the engine. It died with what sounded like a death rattle, and ran for the door. The bell chimed as he burst through, slightly out of breath, his hair damp from the drizzle. The morning setup was already in progress, Jenny refilling salt shakers, Miguel prepping the griddle, and Craig Dalton standing by the register with his arms crossed and a smile on his face that made Ethan's stomach clench. "Well, well, well," Craig said, his voice carrying across the empty diner. "Look who decided to show up. Cole, what time does your shift start?" Ethan grabbed his apron from the hook, his hands fumbling with the strings. 5 a.m. I know. My truck stalled. I didn't ask about your truck. I asked what time your shift starts. 5 a.m., Ethan repeated, tying the apron with jerky movements. "I'm sorry. It won't happen again." "You're right about that." Craig pushed off from the register and walked toward him, slow and deliberate, like a predator circling prey. "You know what I hate, Cole? I hate excuses. Truck trouble, kid trouble, traffic trouble. I've heard them all. You know what they all have in common?" Ethan said nothing, focusing on getting his apron tied. "They're all bullshit," Craig finished. "You were late yesterday too. 3 minutes, but late is late." "I was here at 4:58, Ethan said quietly. "I clocked in before 5. "Yeah, cutting it real close. See, that tells me you don't respect this job. You don't respect me. You think you can just waltz in whenever you feel like it, and we'll all just work around your schedule. That's not... I do respect this job. I work harder than anyone here." Ethan could feel his face heating up, anger and humiliation warring in his chest. Jenny had stopped filling salt shakers and was watching with wide eyes. Even Miguel had paused at the griddle, spatula in hand. "Harder than anyone?" Craig laughed, a sharp, ugly sound. "Is that what you tell yourself? That you're some kind of hero for showing up and doing the bare minimum?" "I don't do the bare minimum." Ethan's voice came out harder than he intended. "I work doubles. I cover shifts when people call in sick. I've been here for 3 years and You've never been on time consistently," Craig interrupted. "You've never not asked for special treatment. Oh, I need this day off for my kid. Oh, I need to leave early for a parent-teacher conference. You think having a kid makes you special? Newsflash, Cole. Nobody cares about your sob story." The words hit like physical blows. Ethan opened his mouth, then closed it, trying to find a response that wouldn't get him fired on the spot. "I never asked for special treatment," he said finally, his voice low. "I asked for the same consideration anyone else gets, and I always make up the hours. Yeah, well, not today." Craig crossed his arms again, his smile widening. "You were 7 minutes late. That's the 3rd time in 2 weeks. You know what the policy is." Ethan's heart started to pound. "Craig, please, it was my truck. I can show you." "The policy," Craig continued, raising his voice slightly, "is 3 lates in a 2-week period equals a write-up. This is your write-up, Cole. 1 more, and you're done." A write-up. That meant a permanent mark in his file, something that would follow him if he ever tried to get another job. It meant Craig would be watching him even more closely, waiting for him to slip up, to give him a reason to pull the trigger. "Fine," Ethan said, forcing the word out through clenched teeth. "Write me up. Can I get to work now? We open in 20 minutes. "Oh, you'll get to work, all right." Craig gestured toward the far corner of the diner. "Section 1. By the kitchen. Again." Of course. The worst section for the 3rd day in a row. Ethan nodded stiffly and walked away, feeling Craig's eyes boring into his back. The morning rush was brutal. The rain had picked up again, turning into a steady downpour that drove more people than usual into the diner. By 7 a.m., every table was full, and Ethan was running between the kitchen and his section with plates balanced on both arms, trying to keep up with the orders. His feet throbbed in his cheap shoes. His lower back sent shooting pains up his spine every time he bent to set down a plate. And through it all, Craig stood by the register, watching him with that small, satisfied smile. Around 8:30, during a brief lull, Ethan ducked into the break room and pulled out his phone. A text from Mrs. Chen. Mason ate all his breakfast. He wants to know if you can read him an extra chapter tonight. Ethan smiled despite his exhaustion and typed back, "Tell him we'll read 2 extra chapters. Love you both." "Break's over, Cole." Ethan's head snapped up. Craig stood in the doorway, arms crossed, as always. "I've been here for 3.5 hours straight," Ethan said. "I'm entitled to a 15-minute break. And you'll get one, later. Right now I need you on the floor. Table 6 is waiting for their check." Ethan pocketed his phone and pushed past Craig, biting back the words that wanted to explode out of him. He'd been here for 3 years. 3 years of swallowing his pride, of taking Craig's abuse, of smiling through the humiliation because he needed this job, because Mason needed him to keep this job. But God, he was tired. So tired of the constant battle, the constant stress, the knowledge that one wrong move, one more minute late, one slightly sharp response could cost him everything. He delivered the check to table 6, a nice older couple who left him a generous tip despite his section's proximity to the kitchen, and was heading back to the register when the door chimed. Ethan glanced up automatically, his customer service smile already in place, and froze. Walter Briggs stood in the doorway, rain dripping from an expensive-looking overcoat, his gray eyes scanning the diner until they landed on Ethan. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then Walter's face broke into a warm smile, and he headed straight for Ethan's section. "Walter?" Ethan met him halfway, lowering his voice. "What are you doing here?" "I wanted to see where you worked," Walter said simply, "and to thank you properly for the other night. I know I said it then, but I don't think you understand what you did for me." "I just gave you a ride and some soup," Ethan said, uncomfortably aware of Craig watching from the register. "It wasn't a big deal." "It was to me." Walter glanced around the diner, taking in the vintage decor, the bustling kitchen, the other servers moving efficiently through their sections. "This place has character. How long have you worked here?" 3 years. Ethan grabbed a menu from the stand. "Listen, I should seat you. My manager's already on my case today, and if he thinks I'm chatting instead of working, of course." "I understand." Walter followed Ethan to a booth in section 1, right next to the kitchen door. "Is this your section?" "Yeah," Ethan said, trying not to let his embarrassment show. The booth was cramped, the vinyl seat was patched with duct tape in one spot, and the table wobbled slightly. "Not the best spot, but it's perfect," Walter interrupted, sliding into the seat. "I'll have coffee and whatever your special is. Eggs, bacon, hash browns, and toast. Coming right up." As Ethan turned to go, Walter caught his wrist gently. "Ethan, thank you again for everything." "You already thanked me," Ethan said, but he was smiling. "Eat your breakfast before it gets cold. Before I even bring it to you." He put the order in with Miguel, who raised an eyebrow at the fond expression on Ethan's face. "Who's the old guy?" Miguel asked, cracking eggs onto the griddle with practiced efficiency. "Just someone I helped the other night. His car broke down in the storm." "And he tracked you down at work? That's dedication, man." "I gave him my card," Ethan said, but Miguel's words made him pause. Walter had driven all the way back from Columbus, 2 hours each way, just to see him. That was more than a simple thank you. That was something else. Something that made Ethan's chest feel tight in a way he couldn't quite name. He poured coffee, delivered it to Walter's table along with cream and sugar, and tried not to notice the way the older man's eyes followed him as he worked his section. The morning continued its relentless pace. More customers, more orders, more trips between kitchen and tables until Ethan's legs felt like rubber and his smile felt painted on. Around 10 a.m., Craig's voice cut through the diner noise. "Cole, my office. Now." Ethan's stomach dropped. He glanced at Walter, who was still sitting in the corner booth nursing his second cup of coffee, then followed Craig to the small office at the back of the diner. The office was barely larger than a closet, dominated by a desk covered in paperwork and a filing cabinet that looked older than Ethan. Craig shut the door and leaned against the desk, his arms crossed in his signature pose. "We need to talk about your performance," Craig began. "My performance is fine," Ethan said. "I've had no customer complaints. My tips are good. And your performance is barely adequate," Craig interrupted. "You're late constantly. You take too many breaks. And now you're socializing with customers when you should be working. I took one break today for less than 5 minutes, and I wasn't socializing. That customer is someone I helped a few days ago. He just wanted to say thank you. I don't care if he's the President of the United States. When you're on my clock, you work. You don't chat with your friends." Ethan could feel his temper fraying, the careful control he maintained starting to slip. "I have worked. I've been working nonstop since I got here. Late or not, I do my job and I do it well." "Yeah? Well, it's not good enough." Craig pushed off from the desk and stepped closer, invading Ethan's space. "You want the truth, Cole? You're a liability. You're unreliable. You're barely competent. And the only reason you're still here is because I can't find anyone desperate enough to work the shit shifts you work." The words hung in the air between them, sharp and cruel, and designed to cut deep. Ethan felt something inside him crack, 3 years of swallowed pride and bitten tongues finally reaching their limit. "You know what?" Ethan said, his voice shaking with suppressed rage. "I show up every single day. I show up, even when my truck is falling apart and my kid is sick and I'm so tired I can barely stand. I show up. I work doubles when you need me. I cover when people call in. I smile at customers even when they're rude, and I take your crap day after day because I need this job. But I am not incompetent, and I am not a liability." Craig's face had gone red. "You're fired." The words were so sudden, so unexpected, that for a moment Ethan just stared at him. "What?" "You're fired. Insubordination. Arguing with management. Pick one. I don't care. You're done." Craig reached past him and yanked open the office door. "Clear out your locker and get out." "You can't." "Craig, wait." "I can, and I am. Get out of my diner." Ethan stood frozen, his mind refusing to process what was happening. Fired. He was fired. 3 years of work gone in an instant. No more paychecks, no more tips, no more way to pay rent or buy groceries or keep the lights on. Mason. God, what was he going to tell Mason? "Now, Cole," Craig said, his voice rising, "before I call the cops and have you escorted out." Ethan walked out of the office on legs that felt numb. The diner had gone quiet, every customer and staff member watching as he made his way to the small break room where his locker sat. His hand shook as he worked the combination. Inside was almost nothing. A change of clothes, an extra pair of shoes with holes in both soles, and a photo of Mason taped to the inside of the door. Ethan grabbed the photo, left the rest, and slammed the locker shut. When he turned around, Jenny was standing there, tears in her eyes. "Ethan, I'm so sorry," she whispered. "This isn't fair. Craig's been gunning for you for months. Everyone knows it." "It's okay," Ethan said automatically, even though it wasn't. Nothing was okay. "It's not okay. Someone should report him to the owner. Someone should—" "Jenny, don't." Ethan squeezed her shoulder. "Don't risk your job for me. Just take care of yourself, okay?" He walked back out into the diner, hyper-aware of every eye on him. Craig stood by the register, arms crossed, wearing that satisfied smile again. "Everyone, I want you to witness this," Craig announced, his voice carrying across the suddenly silent diner. "This is what happens when you disrespect management, when you think the rules don't apply to you. Cole here thought he was special, thought he could show up late, make excuses, and I just let it slide because he's got some sob story about being a single dad." Ethan's face burned with humiliation. Customers were staring. Staff members were frozen in place. And through it all, Craig kept talking. "But here's the thing. Nobody's special. Nobody gets a free pass. You work hard, you show up on time, or you're gone. That's how the real world works. Maybe now Cole will learn that lesson." "Are you done?" Ethan asked quietly. "Oh, I'm just getting started. See, I think everyone here should know what kind of employee Cole really was. The kind who spent more time making excuses than actually working. The kind who—" "That's enough." The voice came from the corner booth. Walter Briggs stood up, his coffee cup still in hand, his gray eyes fixed on Craig with an intensity that made the air feel electric. "I'm sorry, sir, but this doesn't concern you," Craig said, his smile faltering slightly. "If you'll just—" "It concerns me very much," Walter said, setting down his cup with deliberate care. "Because you're humiliating a good man in public, a man who, 3 nights ago, saved my life." The diner was silent now, everyone's attention shifting between Walter and Craig. "I don't know what sob story he told you," Craig started, "but he told me no story at all. He simply pulled over in a storm when my car broke down, took me to his home, gave me food and shelter, and asked for nothing in return." Walter took a step forward. "And now I'm watching you destroy him for being 7 minutes late due to car trouble. The same kind of trouble I experienced." Craig's face had gone from red to white. "Sir, I appreciate your concern, but this is a management decision." "Do you know who I am?" The question hung in the air. Craig blinked, confusion replacing his anger. "Should I?" "My name is Walter Briggs," Walter said calmly, "and I own this diner." The silence that followed was absolute. Ethan felt like the floor had dropped out from under him. Walter owned the diner? The Riverside Griddle? Craig's mouth opened and closed like a fish. That's impossible. The owner is an elderly man in Columbus who hasn't visited in 5 years because he was too busy grieving his dead wife and neglecting his other responsibilities, Walter finished. "That would be me." He pulled out his wallet and extracted a business card, holding it out to Craig. "My attorney can verify my identity if you'd like, but I assure you I own this establishment, have owned it for 15 years, and I'm fairly certain that gives me the authority to overrule your little power trip." Craig took the card with shaking hands, his eyes scanning it. Whatever he saw there made his face go even paler. "Mr. Briggs, I didn't know. Nobody told you because I didn't announce myself. I wanted to see how my business was being run, how my employees were being treated." Walter's voice remained calm, but there was steel underneath. "And what I've seen is appalling." He turned to address the entire diner. "I apologize to all of you, customers and staff alike, for this scene, but I want to make something very clear." He looked back at Craig. "Ethan Cole is not fired. In fact, he's being promoted. As of right now, he's the co-manager of this establishment." Ethan felt like he'd been struck by lightning. "Walter, I can't—" "You can, and you will." Walter smiled at him, warm and genuine. 3 nights ago, you showed me more kindness than I've experienced in years. You saw someone in need and helped without hesitation, without expecting anything in return. That kind of character is rare, and it's exactly what this place needs." He turned back to Craig. "As for you, Mr. Dalton, you're demoted. You'll report to Ethan from now on. And if I hear of any retaliation, any attempt to undermine him, you'll be looking for a new job. Am I clear?" Craig's jaw worked soundlessly. Finally, he managed a strangled, "Yes, sir." "Good." Walter gestured to the customers, many of whom were staring with open mouths. "Please, everyone, finish your meals. Breakfast is on the house today. Consider it my apology for the disruption." A smattering of applause broke out, tentative at first, then growing stronger. Ethan stood frozen, unable to process what had just happened. Promoted, co-manager, reporting to him, Craig would be reporting to him. Walter crossed to Ethan and placed a hand on his shoulder. "Why don't we step outside and talk?" Ethan nodded mutely and followed Walter out the front door. The rain had stopped, leaving everything clean and bright. They stood in the parking lot, and for a long moment, neither of them spoke. "I don't understand," Ethan finally said. "You own the diner? You never said—" "I know, and I apologize for the deception." Walter sighed, suddenly looking every one of his years. "After my wife died, I let a lot of things go. This place included. I hired managers to run it and didn't ask questions as long as the money kept coming in. But these past few days, after what you did for me, I realized I'd lost sight of what matters. People matter. Kindness matters. And you reminded me of that. So you came here to check on me? I came here to thank you properly. What I found was a good man being abused by a petty tyrant." Walter's expression hardened. "That ends today. I'm going to take an active role in this business again. Make sure it's run the way it should be. And I want you to help me. Walter, I'm not management material. I'm just a server who... You're a man who works harder than anyone else, who shows up even when it's difficult, who treats people with respect and dignity. That's exactly what makes you management material. Walter smiled. Besides, I'm not giving you a choice. You saved my life, Ethan. Now let me help save yours. Ethan's eyes burned with tears he refused to let fall. I don't know what to say. Say yes. Say you'll help me turn this place into what it should be. A place where people are valued, where hard work is rewarded, where someone like Craig Dalton can't terrorize good employees. Yes, Ethan said, his voice rough. Yes, I'll help you. They shook hands, and Walter's grip was firm, warm, anchoring. When they walked back into the diner, Ethan felt like he was stepping into a new life. Craig stood by the register, his face a mask of barely controlled rage. The other staff members watched with expressions ranging from shock to barely concealed delight. And the customers ate their free breakfast with the satisfied air of people who'd witnessed justice being served alongside their eggs. Ethan caught Jenny's eye across the diner. She mouthed, "Oh my God," and gave him a thumbs up that made him smile despite everything. Walter addressed the staff. "I'll be in tomorrow to meet with all of you individually. I want to hear your concerns, your suggestions, anything you think could make this place better. This is your workplace, and your voices matter." He turned to Ethan. "Why don't you go home, spend the day with your son? We'll meet tomorrow to discuss your new responsibilities." "Are you sure? I could..." "Ethan, go home. That's an order from your new business partner." Partner. The word sent a thrill through Ethan's chest. He untied his apron, hung it on the hook, and walked toward the door. As he passed Craig, the man wouldn't meet his eyes. Outside, the sun had broken through the clouds, painting everything in golden light. Ethan climbed into his dying truck, turned the key, and for once, it started on the first try. He drove home in a daze, his mind replaying the past hour over and over. Fired, then promoted. Co-manager. Craig's face when Walter revealed who he was. The applause. When he walked into the apartment, Mrs. Chen looked up from where she was teaching Mason how to fold origami cranes. "You're home early," she said, concern crossing her face. "Is everything..." "Everything's good," Ethan interrupted, scooping Mason up and spinning him around. "Everything's really, really good." "Daddy!" Mason squealed with delight. "What happened?" "I got a promotion, buddy. I'm going to be the manager of the diner." "That's good, right?" "That's very good." Ethan set him down, his heart so full it felt like it might burst. "That means more money, better hours. Maybe we can finally fix the truck. Maybe even get you that dinosaur encyclopedia you wanted." Mason's eyes went wide. "Really? Really?" Mrs. Chen stood smiling. "I'm happy for you, Ethan. You deserve good things." After she left, Ethan made lunch for Mason, grilled cheese and tomato soup, and listened to his son chatter about his morning, about the origami cranes, about a boy at school who claimed his dad could lift a car, but Mason knew that was impossible because of physics. And for the first time in 3 years, Ethan felt something he'd almost forgotten. Hope. That night, after Mason was asleep, Ethan sat on his sagging couch and stared at his phone. Walter had texted, "Get some rest. Tomorrow's a new beginning." A new beginning. 3 days ago, he'd been drowning in exhaustion and bills and the constant stress of barely surviving. One act of kindness, stopping for a stranger in the rain, had changed everything. But as Ethan lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling, he couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over, that promoting him had been just the first move in whatever plan Walter had in mind. And he couldn't shake the image of Craig's face, white with rage and humiliation, as he'd been demoted in front of everyone. Craig Dalton didn't seem like the type to accept defeat gracefully, and Ethan had a sinking feeling that tomorrow would bring complications he couldn't yet imagine. But tonight, he let himself feel the hope. Let himself believe that maybe, just maybe, the universe was finally giving him a break. He closed his eyes and slept dreamlessly for the first time in months. Ethan arrived at the Riverside Griddle at 6 a.m. the next morning, a full hour before his usual shift. The sunrise painted the chrome exterior in shades of gold and pink, and for the first time in 3 years, He didn't feel the familiar dread as he approached the door. Instead, butterflies danced in his stomach, nervous excitement rather than anxiety. Walter's car was already in the lot. The Mercedes, now repaired, sat gleaming in the early light. Inside, the diner was quiet except for the sound of the coffee maker gurgling and the low hum of the refrigerators. Walter sat in a corner booth with a laptop open and several folders spread across the table. He looked up when the bell chimed and smiled. "Right on time, actually early. I like that." He gestured to the seat across from him. "Sit, we have a lot to discuss." Ethan slid into the booth, acutely aware that he was still wearing his server clothes, the same black slacks and white shirt, though he'd made sure they were freshly pressed. "Should I have dressed differently? I wasn't sure what co-managers wear." "You're fine, though we'll need to get you some better shoes." Walter glanced down at Ethan's worn footwear, the hole in the left sole poorly concealed with duct tape. "Can't have my partner hobbling around in those." Partner. There was that word again, sending a warm flush through Ethan's chest. "I've been going through the books," Walter continued, turning the laptop so Ethan could see the screen. Rows of numbers and dates filled a spreadsheet. "The diner's profitable, which is good, but not as profitable as it should be. Our food costs are reasonable, our location is excellent, but something's not adding up." Ethan leaned closer, scanning the numbers. He'd never been great at math beyond the basics, but even he could see discrepancies. "What do you mean?" "Look here." Walter pointed to a column labeled Daily Cash Deposits. "On average, we should be seeing deposits of around $3,000 per day, based on our customer count and average ticket price. But the actual deposits are consistently $200 to $300 short. Maybe people are using cards more? Card transactions are tracked separately, and those numbers are fine. This is specifically the cash." Walter pulled up another spreadsheet. "It's been happening for about 8 months. Small amounts each day, but it adds up. We're talking about $70,000, maybe $80,000 over that time period." The number made Ethan's stomach drop. "You think someone's stealing?" "I think it's a strong possibility." Walter closed the laptop and fixed Ethan with a serious look. "As co-manager, you'll have access to all of this. The books, the registers, everything. I want you to keep your eyes open. Note anything unusual, anyone who seems nervous when you're around the money." Ethan immediately thought of Craig. The man had been assistant manager for 2 years, which meant he had access to the registers and the safe where the daily deposits were kept before being taken to the bank. "You think it's Craig?" "I think he's the most likely suspect, yes, but I don't want to jump to conclusions without evidence." Walter's expression softened. "I know yesterday was dramatic. Probably more than you bargained for when you stopped to help an old man in the rain. But this is important, Ethan. If someone is stealing from this business, it's not just hurting me. It's hurting every employee here who depends on this place staying open." The weight of responsibility settled on Ethan's shoulders. He'd never been in charge of anything beyond his own tables and his own son. Now Walter was asking him to help catch a thief, to be responsible for the livelihood of a dozen people. "I'll do my best," Ethan said quietly. "But Walter, I have to be honest. I don't know anything about management. I've never supervised anyone. What if I'm not good at this?" "You will be." "Do you want to know how I know?" Walter smiled. "Because you care. You care about people, you work hard, and you're honest. Those 3 qualities will take you further than any business degree." The kitchen door swung open, and Miguel emerged, stopping short when he saw them. "Oh, sorry, didn't know you were here. I'll just—" "Miguel, come here," Walter called. The cook approached hesitantly, wiping his hands on his apron. "I want to introduce you properly to your new co-manager." Miguel's face broke into a genuine grin. "Man, I heard about yesterday. Whole staff's been talking about it. About time someone put Craig in his place." He held out his hand and Ethan shook it. "Congratulations. You'll be good at this." "Thanks, Miguel. That means a lot." "He's right, you know," Miguel continued. "You're the only one who treats the kitchen staff like actual people. Craig acts like we're robots. And you always say thank you when I get your orders out fast." He shrugged. "Little things matter." After Miguel headed back to prep, more staff began arriving. Jenny came in and immediately hugged Ethan so hard he thought his ribs might crack. I'm so happy for you. You have no idea. We all are. The other servers, Tina and Marcus, echoed the sentiment. Even Todd, the dishwasher who rarely spoke to anyone, gave Ethan a nod that felt like high praise. But when Craig arrived at 7:30, the temperature in the room dropped. He walked through the door, his expression carefully neutral, and headed straight for the office without acknowledging anyone. Ethan caught the rigid set of his shoulders, the way his hands were clenched into fists at his sides. "Give him space," Walter murmured. "This is an adjustment for everyone." The morning shift started without incident. Ethan worked his section as usual, but Walter insisted he also spend time observing the flow of the restaurant from a management perspective. How the servers interacted with customers, how efficiently orders moved from kitchen to table, where the bottlenecks were. Around 9 a.m., during a lull, Craig emerged from the office and approached the register where Jenny was counting bills. Ethan was refilling the coffee station nearby, close enough to hear without being obvious. "Let me do that," Craig said, reaching for the money. "It's okay, I've got it," Jenny replied, not looking up from her count. "I said let me do it." Craig's voice had an edge now. "It's still my job to verify the drawer." Jenny's hands stilled. She glanced toward Ethan, uncertainty in her eyes. Ethan stepped forward. "Actually, Craig, Walter asked me to start learning the register procedures. Why don't you walk me through it?" Craig's jaw tightened. For a moment, Ethan thought he might refuse. Then he forced a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Of course, happy to show you the ropes." He proceeded to explain the process in a tone that suggested he was talking to a particularly slow child. How to count the drawer, how to record discrepancies, how to prepare the deposit. Ethan listened carefully, noting that Craig's hands moved quickly over the bills, his fingers practiced, too practiced, maybe. When they finished, Ethan said casually, "So you do this every day?" "Someone has to verify each drawer at the end of every shift. Make sure it matches the receipts." Craig closed the register with more force than necessary. "It's called accountability, something this place hasn't had much of lately." The jab was clear, but Ethan let it slide. "Makes sense. I'll shadow you for a few days to learn the process." Craig's smile tightened. "Looking forward to it." As the day progressed, Ethan began to notice patterns. Craig was always nearby when money was being handled. He volunteered to take the deposit to the bank each afternoon, and when he thought no one was watching, his expression twisted into something dark and bitter. Around 2 p.m., Walter pulled Ethan aside. "I need to head back to Columbus for a few days to handle some business. Think you can manage things here?" "Wait, you're leaving? Already?" Panic fluttered in Ethan's chest. "What if something happens? What if I mess up?" "You won't. And if you need anything, call me. Anytime, day or night." Walter squeezed his shoulder. "I trust you, Ethan. Now you need to trust yourself." After Walter left, the diner felt different. The staff kept glancing at Ethan as if waiting for him to transform into a completely different person now that he was officially in charge. Even the customers seemed to sense the shift, though they couldn't possibly know what had happened. Ethan spent the afternoon doing what he did best, working. He took orders, delivered food, cleared tables, and tried not to think about the weight of expectation pressing down on him. But he also watched. He paid attention to who was where when cash registers were opened, how Craig moved through the space like a shark circling prey. At 5 p.m., as the dinner rush was beginning, Craig approached him with a deposit bag. "Taking this to the bank. Be back in 20. "Actually," Ethan said, making a split-second decision, "I'll come with you. Walter wanted me to learn the bank procedures too." Craig's expression flickered. Annoyance? Fear? Before settling back into neutral. "Sure. Whatever." They walked to Craig's car in tense silence. It was a newer model, Ethan noticed, probably only a few years old. Expensive. More expensive than an assistant manager at a diner should be able to afford. The bank was 3 blocks away. Craig drove with aggressive precision, taking corners too fast, braking too hard. Neither of them spoke. Inside the bank, Craig filled out the deposit slip with practiced ease and handed everything to the teller. Ethan watched the process carefully, noting the amount, $2,467. Later, he'd compare that to the register receipts. On the drive back, Craig finally broke the silence. "You know this is a mistake, right?" Ethan turned to look at him. "What is?" You, plain manager. Walter's using you to make himself feel better about abandoning this place for 5 years. Once the novelty wears off, you'll be right back where you started." Craig's knuckles were white on the steering wheel. "Except this time, everyone will know you failed." The words were designed to hurt, to undermine, to plant seeds of doubt, and they almost worked. Almost. "Maybe," Ethan said quietly. "Or maybe I'll surprise everyone, including myself." Craig laughed, harsh and bitter. "You really believe that, don't you? That kindness and hard work will magically make everything better? That's not how the world works, Cole. The world chews up people like you and spits them out. People like me? People who think they're heroes, who think one good deed makes them special." He pulled into the diner parking lot and killed the engine. "You're not special. You're just lucky, and luck runs out." He got out of the car and slammed the door before Ethan could respond. That night, after the diner closed and the staff had gone home, Ethan sat in the office with the day's receipts spread across the desk. He'd stayed late, telling himself it was to learn the closing procedures, but really it was because he wanted time alone with the numbers. He tallied the register receipts 3 times. The total cash that should have been collected, $2,732. The amount Craig had deposited, $2,467. A difference of $265. Ethan's hands trembled as he wrote down the numbers. One day might be a mistake, an honest error in counting. But Walter had said this had been happening for 8 months, $200 or $300 per day, added up over time. He pulled out his phone and called Walter. "Ethan?" Walter's voice was warm despite the late hour. "Everything okay?" "I think I found something." Ethan explained what he'd discovered, his voice low even though he was alone in the building. "The receipts don't match the deposit. Not even close." How much was Craig alone with the money today? "He counted the evening registers by himself while I was handling a customer complaint, and he had access to the deposit bag before we went to the bank." Ethan ran a hand through his hair. "But I can't prove he took anything. I didn't see him do it." "You don't need to prove it yet. Just document everything. Write down the discrepancy, the date, the amount. Keep a log." Walter paused. "And Ethan, be careful. If Craig realizes you're watching him, he might get desperate." After they hung up, Ethan sat in the dim office for a long time, staring at the numbers. Somewhere out there, Craig was going home to his nice car and probably a nice apartment, built on money stolen from the very place that employed him. Meanwhile, Ethan had spent 3 years barely scraping by, honest and exhausted and always one emergency away from disaster. The unfairness of it made his chest tight with anger. He locked up the diner and drove home in his sputtering truck, his mind racing. When he walked into his apartment, Mrs. Chen was asleep on the couch with Mason curled against her, both of them covered by a knitted blanket. Ethan's heart swelled. This was what mattered. Not money or status or revenge. Just the quiet peace of people who cared about each other, who showed up for each other, who made life bearable through small kindnesses. He gently woke Mrs. Chen and walked her to her apartment, thanking her profusely. Then he carried Mason to bed, tucking him in with his stuffed bear and brushing the hair back from his forehead. "Love you, buddy," he whispered. "Love you too, Daddy," Mason mumbled without opening his eyes. "You're the best manager ever." Ethan smiled in the darkness. If only it were that simple. The next few days fell into a routine. Ethan arrived early, worked his shifts, and stayed late to go over the books. Each day, the discrepancies continued. Sometimes $200, sometimes $300. Once, $450. He documented everything in a small notebook he kept locked in his car. Dates, amounts, circumstances. And he watched Craig. The man was careful. Ethan had to give him that. He never took money when someone was obviously watching. He created distractions, a complaint about food quality, a spill that needed cleaning, and used those moments to skim from the registers. On the 3rd day, Ethan caught him. It was late afternoon, the lull between lunch and dinner. Craig was at the register, ostensibly counting the drawer for the shift change. Ethan had positioned himself at a table in the corner, doing paperwork but with a clear line of sight. He watched as Craig counted, his lips moving silently. Then, quick as a snake, Craig's hand dipped into the drawer and came out with several bills that went into his pocket instead of the deposit bag. Ethan's pulse hammered in his ears. He'd seen it. Clear as day, he'd seen it. But when he glanced around, no one else had noticed. Jenny was in the kitchen, Miguel was prepping for dinner, Tina was on break. It was just Ethan and Craig and the theft that had happened in plain sight. Ethan pulled out his phone and texted Walter. Saw him take money, right from the register. What do I do? The response came within seconds. Don't confront him. Act normal. I'm calling my attorney and a private investigator. We need evidence that will hold up. Act normal. Ethan took a breath and forced himself to focus on the paperwork in front of him, though the numbers blurred together. His hands were shaking with adrenaline and anger. Craig finished at the register and headed to the office, the deposit bag in hand. The bag that was now lighter by however much he'd just stolen. 2 hours later, after the dinner rush had started, Walter called. The investigator will be there tomorrow morning. He's going to install cameras in the office and near the registers. Hidden ones. We'll catch Craig in the act on video, and then we'll have everything we need. Cameras, Ethan repeated. You think he'll keep stealing if there are cameras? He won't know they're there. They're very small, very discreet. And based on what you've told me, he's gotten comfortable, sloppy. He thinks he's invincible. Walter's voice hardened. Tomorrow, we start gathering the evidence that will end this. That night, Ethan lay awake, staring at his ceiling and thinking about justice. About how Craig had tormented him for months, had humiliated him in front of customers and staff, had fired him in the cruelest way possible. And all the while, Craig had been stealing. Thousands of dollars while Ethan struggled to buy groceries. The anger was back, hot and righteous. But beneath it was something else. Fear. What if the cameras didn't work? What if Craig stopped stealing for a few days? What if they couldn't prove anything and Ethan had made an enemy who would never forgive him? Stop it, he whispered to himself in the darkness. You saw what you saw. The truth is the truth. The investigator arrived at 6 a.m. the next morning before any staff except Ethan and Miguel. He was a short, compact man named Davis with gray hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing. Show me the office and the registers, he said without preamble. Ethan led him through the diner, pointing out where the money was kept, where Craig typically stood, the blind spots where someone might steal unobserved. Davis nodded, pulling small devices from his bag. These are camera units. Motion activated, high definition with audio recording. I'll place one in the office, one near each register, and one by the safe in the back. Won't people notice them? Not unless they're looking for them. They're designed to look like smoke detectors or electrical fixtures. Davis worked quickly, his hands steady and practiced. Within an hour, all the cameras were installed and tested. They feed to a secure server that you and Mr. Briggs can access from any device, Davis explained. You'll get alerts when they detect motion in sensitive areas. Keep an eye on the footage and call me when you have what you need. After he left, Ethan stood in the office and stared up at the smoke detector that was actually a camera. It felt like crossing a line somehow, surveilling his own staff. But then he thought about the missing money, about Craig's sneer, about all the people who depended on this diner staying open. The line had been crossed long before today. Ethan was just making sure justice could see clearly. The morning passed normally. Craig arrived, surly and uncommunicative as usual. The staff worked their shifts, customers came and went, and all the while the cameras watched. Around noon, Ethan's phone buzzed with an alert. He pulled it up to see a notification. Motion detected in office. He opened the app Davis had installed and watched the live feed. Craig was in the office, alone, kneeling by the safe. Ethan's breath caught. The safe where they kept the cash before the daily bank run. Craig's hands worked the combination, which he'd apparently memorized, and the door swung open. Inside, Ethan could see the deposit bags from that morning's receipts, waiting to be taken to the bank that afternoon. Craig glanced at the door, checking that no one was coming. Then he unzipped one of the bags, reached inside, and pulled out a stack of bills. He counted out several 20s, shoved them in his pocket, and zipped the bag closed. The whole thing took less than 30 seconds. Ethan felt sick. He was watching someone he'd worked alongside for 3 years commit a crime so casually it was clearly routine. How many times had Craig done this? How many thousands of dollars had he stolen while Ethan and everyone else struggled? He forced himself to save the video clip and send it to Walter with shaking hands. Walter's response was immediate. Got it. Don't confront him. Let him keep going. The more evidence we have, the stronger the case. The afternoon stretched on, each minute feeling like an hour. Ethan served tables, smiled at customers, and pretended everything was normal while his phone buzzed with more alerts. More videos of Craig stealing, each one documented and saved. By closing time, they had 6 separate videos spanning the entire day. 6 instances of theft, captured in perfect high definition. Walter called at 11 p.m. after Ethan had finished closing. I've been in contact with my attorney and the police. We have enough for charges. They'll make an arrest tomorrow. Tomorrow? Ethan's voice came out strangled. That fast? That fast. The video evidence is clear and damning. The police will come to the diner during opening hours. I want Craig to be arrested in front of everyone, the same way he humiliated you. Walter's voice was steel. Justice should be public. Ethan thought about that as he drove home. Public justice. Craig being let out in handcuffs while the staff and customers watched. It should have felt satisfying, victorious even. But mostly, Ethan just felt tired. He fell into bed without changing clothes and dreamed of cameras and courtrooms, and Craig's face twisted in rage. The next morning, Ethan arrived at the diner at 5 a.m. as usual. Walter was already there, sitting in the same corner booth where he'd first revealed his identity, and with him were 2 police officers in uniform. Ethan, Walter said, gesturing him over. This is Detective Morrison and Officer Chen. They'll be making the arrest this morning. Detective Morrison was a tall black woman with kind eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. Mr. Briggs has shown us the video evidence. It's more than sufficient. We'll wait until your staff is here and then take Mr. Dalton into custody. He'll be here around 7, Ethan said, his mouth dry. That's when his shift starts. They waited. Miguel arrived and started prep, casting confused glances at the police officers. Jenny came in and immediately picked up on the tension, her eyes going wide. Tina and Marcus showed up together, whispering to each other. At 7:02 a.m., Craig walked through the door. He was halfway to the office when Detective Morrison stepped into his path. Craig Dalton? Craig stopped, confusion crossing his face. Yes? Can I help you? I'm Detective Morrison with the Cincinnati Police Department. You're under arrest for embezzlement and theft. She pulled handcuffs from her belt. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. The diner went silent. Craig's face cycled through emotions. Confusion, shock, understanding, and finally rage. What? This is insane. I didn't... His eyes found Ethan standing near the counter. You did this. Turn around, Mr. Dalton, Detective Morrison said firmly. This is a setup. He's lying. Cole's been trying to get me fired since we have video evidence of you stealing from the registers and the safe. Multiple instances over multiple days. She stepped closer. Now turn around. Craig's face went white. He looked at Walter. You're making a mistake. I've been a loyal employee for 2 years. Whatever Cole told you, he's lying to cover his own. I've seen the videos myself, Walter said coldly. Every theft clearly captured. You stole from this business for 8 months, approximately $80,000. You did this while working alongside people who trusted you. The handcuffs clicked shut around Craig's wrists. He stood there, his shoulders rigid, breathing hard. Then he turned his head and looked at Ethan with such pure hatred that Ethan took an involuntary step back. This isn't over, Craig said, his voice low and venomous. You think you've won? You're nobody, Cole. You'll always be nobody. And the minute Briggs gets bored of his charity project, you'll be right back where you started, broke and desperate and pathetic. That's enough, Detective Morrison said, guiding him toward the door. As they led Craig out, his voice rose to a shout. I made this place run. Without me, you'll fail. You hear me, Cole? You'll fail. The door closed behind them, cutting off his tirade. The bell chimed once, cheerfully oblivious to the drama it had just witnessed. For a long moment, nobody moved. The staff stood frozen. Customers who'd come in for early breakfast stared with mouths open, and Ethan felt like he might throw up. Then Jenny started clapping, slowly at first, then faster. Miguel joined in, then Tina and Marcus. Within seconds, the entire diner was applauding. Ethan's eyes burned. He ducked his head, overwhelmed by the wave of emotion crashing over him. 3 years of abuse ended in handcuffs. 3 years of swallowing anger and humiliation finally vindicated. Walter approached and pulled him into a firm hug. "You did good," he said quietly. "You did exactly right." "I just watched the cameras," Ethan said, his voice muffled against Walter's shoulder. "You did everything else. You stopped for me in the rain. That started all of this." Walter pulled back, his hands on Ethan's shoulders. "Never underestimate the power of one kind act, Ethan. It ripples outward in ways you can't imagine." The morning continued in a daze. Customers whispered to each other, thrilled by the drama. The staff worked with renewed energy, as if a poison had been drained from the atmosphere, and Ethan moved through it all feeling like he was floating. Around 10 a.m., his phone rang. Detective Morrison. "Mr. Cole, I wanted to let you know that Mr. Dalton has been formally charged. The DA is confident in the case given the video evidence. He's looking at significant prison time if convicted." "Thank you," Ethan said. "What happens now?" "He'll have a bail hearing. Given the amount stolen and the clear evidence, I'd expect a high bail or possible denial. Then it goes to trial, though most cases like this end in plea deals." She paused. "You may need to testify about the workplace environment and your observations. Are you comfortable with that?" "Yes, whatever you need." After they hung up, Ethan stood in the office, his office now, really, and let the reality sink in. Craig was gone. Actually gone. The fear that had lived in Ethan's chest for 3 years, the constant anxiety about being fired or humiliated or torn down, was finally lifting. He could breathe. That evening, after the diner closed, Walter took Ethan to a nice restaurant across town, the kind with cloth napkins and waiters and vests who described the specials in hushed, reverent tones. "This is too much," Ethan protested as they were seated at a table by the window. "It's a celebration. You've earned it." Walter ordered wine, a bottle that cost more than Ethan made in a day, and raised his glass. "To justice and to new beginnings." They clinked glasses. The wine was smooth and rich, nothing like the cheap stuff Ethan occasionally bought at the grocery store. "I've been thinking," Walter said, setting down his glass, "about what comes next for the diner. For you." "What do you mean?" "I mean that I'm 78 years old. I've spent the past 5 years hiding from life, avoiding responsibility, letting grief make my decisions. But you reminded me what matters. You reminded me that I still have something to contribute." He smiled. "I want to rebuild the diner, not just maintain it, but make it better. Raise wages, improve conditions, expand the menu, and I want you as my full partner in that." "Partner," Ethan repeated. "Like an actual partner? With ownership?" 20% stake to start. As you learn the business, we can discuss increasing that." Walter's expression turned serious. "I'm not offering this out of charity, Ethan. I'm offering it because I believe in you. Because in 3 days, you've shown more integrity and dedication than most people show in a lifetime." Ethan's throat tightened. 20% of the business. Real ownership. Real security for Mason's future. "I don't know what to say." "Say yes. Say you'll help me build something worth building." Walter reached across the table and gripped Ethan's hand. "Say you'll let me be part of your life, because God knows I need family as much as you do." Family. The word hung in the air between them, weighted with meaning. Ethan thought about his small apartment, about Mason, about Mrs. Chen and the makeshift family they'd created from necessity and kindness. And now Walter, this unexpected gift of a mentor and friend and father figure, all rolled into one. "Yes," Ethan said, his voice rough with emotion. "Yes to all of it." They finished dinner talking about plans and dreams and possibilities. Walter described his vision for the diner: better ingredients, local suppliers, perhaps even expanding to a second location someday. Ethan shared his ideas too, tentative at first but growing bolder as Walter encouraged him. When they finally left the restaurant, the night was cool and clear, stars visible despite the city lights. "Thank you," Ethan said as they stood by their cars. "For everything, for giving me a chance, for believing in me when I didn't believe in myself." "Thank me by living well," Walter replied, "by being the man I already know you are. By raising your son to be kind and honest and brave." He paused. "By remembering that one moment of compassion can change everything." Ethan drove home with his windows down, letting the cool air wash over him. When he pulled into his parking lot, he sat in the truck for a long moment, just breathing. Craig was gone. The stealing was over. And somehow, impossibly, Ethan had not just survived, but thrived. He climbed the stairs to his apartment and found Mason still awake, sitting at the kitchen table with Mrs. Chen working on a puzzle. "Daddy!" Mason launched himself at Ethan, wrapping small arms around his waist. "Mrs. Chen said you were having an important dinner. Was it good?" "It was very good, buddy." Ethan lifted him up, holding him close. "And I have some news. Things are going to get better for us. A lot better." "Better how?" "Better like maybe we can move to a bigger apartment. Better like you can have new shoes when you need them instead of waiting. Better like Daddy doesn't have to work 7 days a week anymore." Mason's eyes went wide. "Really? Really?" After Mrs. Chen left and Mason was tucked into bed, Ethan stood in his small living room and looked around. The sagging couch, the wobbly coffee table, the TV that was older than his son. Soon, he'd be able to afford better. Not just for himself, but for Mason. The thought made him smile. He pulled out his phone and found the photo Jenny had snapped that afternoon. The staff gathered around him, all of them grinning, with Walter in the center looking proud and happy. Family, Ethan thought. Not the one he'd been born into or the one he'd lost, but the one he'd built through small kindnesses and hard work and refusing to give up even when everything felt impossible. And it all started with stopping for a stranger in the rain. He fell asleep that night with the photo on his bedside table, with Mason breathing quietly in the next room, with hope burning bright in his chest for the first time in 3 years. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. Learning to truly manage the diner, navigating his new responsibilities, probably dealing with lawyers and testimony about Craig's arrest. But tonight, Ethan let himself feel the pure, simple joy of justice served and kindness rewarded. The universe, it seemed, wasn't entirely cruel after all. The week following Craig's arrest passed in a blur of activity that left Ethan's head spinning. He thought managing the diner would mean counting registers and making schedules, but Walter had other plans. Better plans. On Monday morning, Walter arrived with an accountant named Patricia Chen. No relation to Mrs. Chen, though Ethan briefly wondered if the universe was playing some cosmic joke on him. Patricia was a sharp-eyed woman in her 50s who spoke in numbers the way poets spoke in metaphors. "Your food costs are too high," she announced within an hour of reviewing the books. She spread invoices across the office desk like a card dealer. "You're paying premium prices for mediocre suppliers. Craig was probably getting kickbacks." Ethan leaned over her shoulder, trying to make sense of the columns. Kickbacks? Common scheme, manager orders from expensive supplier gives him cash under the table, everyone wins except the business. Patricia circled several entries with her red pen. "See this? You're paying $6 per pound for ground beef when you could get the same quality for $4.50 from a local supplier. Multiply that across all your ingredients all year long." "How much are we talking about?" Walter asked. "Conservatively? 20,000 a year in inflated costs, maybe more." Patricia sat back, her expression grim. The theft wasn't just from the registers, it was built into the entire supply chain. The number made Ethan sick. $20,000 that could have gone to staff wages, to better equipment, to the business itself. Instead, it had lined Craig's pockets while everyone else struggled. "Can we prove it?" Ethan asked. "I can document the discrepancies. Whether that's enough for criminal charges, you'd have to ask the DA." Patricia pulled out another folder. "But here's what I suggest. Cut ties with these suppliers immediately. I have contacts with local farms and distributors who will give you better prices and better quality. Cincinnati has amazing food resources if you know where to look." Walter nodded slowly. "Make it happen. And Patricia, I want you to do a full audit. Everything. Every transaction Craig touched for the past 2 years. If there's more theft buried in here, I want it found. Consider it done. Tuesday brought new suppliers. Ethan spent the morning meeting farmers and distributors, shaking hands with people who smelled like earth and honest work. A man named Jim brought samples of grass-fed beef that melted on Ethan's tongue. A woman named Sarah showed him tomatoes so ripe and red they looked like they belonged in a painting. "This is what we used to serve," Sarah said, cradling a tomato like it was precious. "Back when old Mr. Briggs, your grandfather, I guess, ran the place himself. He cared about quality. Then about 10 years ago, orders stopped. I figured you'd gone with the big suppliers." "That's changing," Ethan said. "We want local. We want the best." Sarah's face lit up. "Then you've got it. And honey, you're going to taste the difference." Wednesday, Miguel gathered the kitchen staff and they spent hours testing the new ingredients. The difference was shocking. The grass-fed beef had flavor that their old supplier's meat had lacked. The tomatoes burst with sweetness. Even the lettuce tasted more alive somehow, crisper and more vibrant. "This is what I'm talking about," Miguel said, plating a burger with reverence. "This is the food we should have been serving all along. Craig always said the cheap stuff was fine, that customers couldn't tell the difference. But they can. They absolutely can." They revised the menu, not drastically, but enough to showcase the quality ingredients. The prices went up slightly, not much, just enough to reflect the better food, but Walter insisted they keep breakfast affordable. "This is a neighborhood diner," he said firmly. "I don't want to price out the regulars who've been coming here for 20 years. We find the balance." Thursday brought the first reviews of the changes. Old Mrs. Patterson, who'd been eating breakfast at the Riverside Griddle since 1987, took one bite of her scrambled eggs and burst into tears. "These taste like real eggs," she said, dabbing at her eyes with a napkin. "Like the ones my mother used to make from our chickens." "Oh, honey, what did you do?" "Just started caring about the food again," Ethan said, sitting down across from her. "Do you like it?" "Like it. I love it. You tell Walter Briggs I said he's finally come to his senses." Word spread fast. By Friday, the diner was packed with people who'd heard about the new menu. The lunch rush lasted until 3, and the dinner crowd started arriving at 4. Ethan worked alongside his staff, taking orders and clearing tables, his feet aching in a way that felt good, earned. But amidst the chaos and excitement, his phone kept buzzing with updates from Detective Morrison. The investigation into Craig had expanded. Patricia's audit had uncovered more theft. Forged invoices, phantom employees whose paychecks Craig had been cashing, a web of fraud that stretched back months. "The DA wants to talk to you," Morrison said when she called Friday evening. "They're building a case and your testimony will be crucial. Can you come downtown Monday morning?" "Of course, whatever you need." That night, after Mason was asleep, Ethan sat with Walter in the empty diner, reviewing the week. The older man looked tired but satisfied, his gray eyes reflecting the vintage neon sign outside. "We did good work this week," Walter said, "but I need to tell you something and you're not going to like it." Ethan's stomach dropped. "What?" "Craig made bail." The words hung between them like smoke. Ethan felt his blood go cold. "How? The DA said—" "His family posted it. $200,000. Walter's expression was grim. "He's out. With conditions. Electronic monitoring, travel restrictions, no contact with anyone from the diner. But he's out." "Does he know about the expanded charges?" "His attorney knows. Whether they've told Craig everything, I can't say." Walter leaned forward, his voice serious. "I don't think he'll try anything. He's not stupid. But I want you to be careful. Keep your doors locked. Vary your route to work. If you see him anywhere near you or Mason, call the police immediately." Ethan nodded, though fear was coiling in his gut. Craig's face as he'd been arrested, the hatred in his eyes, his voice promising that this wasn't over. He'd seemed like a man capable of anything. "I'm scared," Ethan admitted quietly. "Not for me, but for Mason. What if Craig—" "He won't. He's already facing serious charges. Doing anything to you would bury him completely." Walter gripped Ethan's shoulder. "But we'll take precautions. I'm hiring a security service to watch your apartment building at night. Just for a few weeks, until the trial date is set and Craig realizes he's beaten. The weekend passed without incident, though Ethan jumped at every unexpected sound. He kept Mason close, turned down Mrs. Chen's offer to watch him on Saturday so she could rest, and instead took his son to the park where he could keep him in sight at all times. Sunday evening, Mason looked up from his dinosaur encyclopedia and asked, "Daddy, why do you keep looking out the window?" Ethan forced a smile. "Just checking the weather, buddy." "But you've checked like 10 times. Is something wrong?" Kids were perceptive, too perceptive sometimes. Ethan sat down next to his son and chose his words carefully. "Remember how I told you there was a man at work who wasn't being nice, and how he had to leave because he was doing something wrong?" Mason nodded solemnly. "Well, that man is upset about having to leave. And when people are upset, sometimes they make bad choices. So I'm just being extra careful to keep us safe." "Like how you lock the door at night?" "Exactly like that. Nothing for you to worry about, okay? I'm just being a careful dad." Mason studied him for a moment, then returned to his book. "Okay, but Daddy, if that man tries to be mean to you, you should tell him about velociraptors. They were pack hunters and worked together to take down prey much bigger than themselves. Cooperation and strategy beat size and strength." Ethan laughed despite his fear. "That's very good advice. Where'd you learn that?" "Page 47. Mason held up the book proudly. Monday morning arrived gray and cold. Ethan dropped Mason at school with strict instructions to wait inside for pickup, then drove downtown to the district attorney's office. The building was imposing, all glass and concrete and the weight of justice. The DA was a woman named Rebecca Foster, younger than Ethan expected, with sharp eyes and an intense focus that made him sit up straighter. "Mr. Cole, thank you for coming. I've reviewed all the evidence and I want to walk you through what we're building." She pulled up a presentation on her computer screen. "Craig Dalton is facing multiple charges: embezzlement, wire fraud, filing false tax returns, and theft. The video evidence you helped gather is damning, but I need context. I need the jury to understand who Craig was, how he operated, what the workplace was like." For the next 2 hours, Ethan answered questions about Craig's management style, about the fear that permeated the diner, about being fired publicly and the humiliation designed to break him. He described watching the registers, documenting the discrepancies, the sick feeling of realizing someone he'd worked with was stealing. "And when Mr. Briggs revealed his identity and promoted you, how did Craig react?" Foster asked. "He was furious, tried to hide it, but I could see it. He got sloppy after that, like he couldn't help himself. The stealing got more frequent." Foster nodded, making notes. "Arrogance. He thought he was untouchable. That's what's going to convict him." She looked up, her expression softening slightly. "I want you to know this case is solid. The video evidence alone would be enough, but Patricia's audit added another $50,000 in documented theft. Craig's looking at 10 to 15 years if convicted. Will there be a trial?" His attorney is already making noises about a plea deal. They know they can't win. "But if it does go to trial, I'll need you to testify. Can you do that?" Ethan thought about standing in a courtroom, facing Craig across the aisle, telling a jury about the theft and cruelty and systematic abuse. The idea terrified him. But he thought about the staff at the diner, about the money that had been stolen, about justice. "Yes," he said, "I can do that." Leaving the DA's office, Ethan felt drained. The morning sun had burned off the clouds, painting downtown Cincinnati in golden light, but he barely noticed. His phone rang as he reached his truck. "Ethan, it's Patricia." The accountant's voice was tight with urgency. "I found something else, something big. Can you get to the diner?" 20 minutes later, Ethan was in the office with Patricia, Walter on speakerphone from Columbus. Patricia had papers spread everywhere, her red pen working overtime. "I was going through Craig's personnel file," she explained, "and I found these." She held up what looked like tax forms, W-2s for employees who don't exist, or rather, who did exist briefly, then quit. But according to these forms, they kept working, and their paychecks kept being issued. Ethan frowned. But if they quit, Craig was cashing the checks, creating fake IDs, opening bank accounts in their names, depositing the money and transferring it to himself. It's called ghost employees, and it's fraud on top of fraud. How much? Walter's voice crackled through the speaker. At least 40,000 over 18 months. Maybe more if I dig deeper. Patricia sat back, rubbing her temples. This man was systematically robbing you blind while playing the role of loyal manager. It's honestly impressive in a deeply disturbing way. Ethan thought about all the times Craig had lectured him about responsibility, about pulling your weight, about the importance of the diner, all while stealing enough money to buy a house. The hypocrisy was staggering. Send everything to Rebecca Foster, Walter said. Let her add it to the charges. Craig wanted to play games. He's going to learn what happens when you get caught. That afternoon, Ethan was training Jenny on some of his new management responsibilities when the door chimed and 3 people walked in wearing suits and carrying briefcases. They had the unmistakable air of attorneys. The lead attorney, a man with silver hair and an expensive watch, approached the counter. I'm looking for Ethan Cole. Ethan's heart rate spiked. That's me. My name is Richard Vance. I represent Craig Dalton. I'd like to speak with you about the charges against my client. I don't think that's appropriate, Ethan said carefully. The DA told me not to discuss the case. I'm not asking you to discuss it. I'm asking you to listen. Vance's smile was professional, practiced, completely lacking warmth. My client maintains his innocence. He believes there's been a misunderstanding that can be cleared up if everyone involved would just talk reasonably. There's video of him stealing. Video that may have been tampered with. Video that, Mr. Vance, Walter's voice cut through the diner. He'd entered through the back door without anyone noticing. I think you should leave. My attorney has already told your office that all communication goes through proper legal channels. Vance turned, his expression cooling further. Mr. Briggs, I was hoping to avoid the expense and drama of a trial. My client is willing to make restitution in exchange for reduced charges. Your client stole over $200,000 from my business. There is no deal. Walter stepped closer, and despite his age, there was nothing frail about him. He terrorized my employees, he humiliated good people, and he did it all while smiling and cashing checks he didn't earn. The only deal he's getting is the one the DA offers him, and even that's more mercy than he deserves. You're making a mistake. The publicity of a trial will damage your business. The details that come out will show exactly what kind of operation Craig was running and how we put a stop to it. I'm not afraid of the truth, Mr. Vance. Is your client? The 2 men stared at each other, the air thick with tension. Finally, Vance nodded curtly and turned to leave, his associates following. At the door, he paused and looked back at Ethan. You think you're the hero in this story, Mr. Cole. But when this goes to trial, we'll show the jury who you really are. A desperate man who needed someone to blame for his own failures. A man who befriended my client's employer and used that relationship to orchestrate a takedown. By the time I'm done, you won't be able to get a job washing dishes. The words were delivered calmly, almost conversationally, but they landed like punches. Ethan felt the color drain from his face. Get out, Walter said, his voice deadly quiet. And tell Craig that threatening my partner is the worst decision he could make. After the attorneys left, Ethan sank onto a stool, his legs suddenly unsteady. The diner had gone silent, customers and staff staring at where the confrontation had unfolded. Don't listen to him, Walter said firmly. That's what they do. They try to scare you, make you doubt yourself, hope you'll fold before trial. But Ethan, you did nothing wrong. You documented a crime, that's all. He said they'd destroy me in court. What if... They can't. There's no there. You have no criminal record. You're a single father working 2 jobs to support your son, and the only relationship between us started when you rescued me in a storm. Any jury will see that within 5 minutes. Jenny approached hesitantly. Mr. Cole, everyone here knows who you are. We know you're not what that lawyer said. If you need us to testify or write statements or anything, we will. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the staff. Miguel called from the kitchen. That guy was full of it, man. Nobody here believes his garbage. The support steadied Ethan. He took a breath and stood up. Thank you, all of you. Now let's get back to work. We've got customers waiting. The rest of the day passed without incident, but Ethan couldn't shake the encounter with Vance. The attorney's words kept replaying in his mind. By the time he picked up Mason from school, His nerves were frayed. "Daddy, you're gripping the steering wheel really hard," Mason observed from the back seat. Ethan forced his hands to relax. "Sorry, buddy. Just thinking about work. Is the mean man still being mean?" "His lawyer came to the diner today. Said some not nice things." Mason was quiet for a moment. "Mrs. Patterson says lawyers are like velociraptors. They attack from unexpected angles and go for the weak spots." Ethan glanced in the rearview mirror. "Mrs. Patterson said that." "Well, she said lawyers are tricky, and you have to be prepared. I added the velociraptor part." Despite everything, Ethan smiled. "You know what, buddy? You're absolutely right, and we're going to be prepared." That evening, after Mason was in bed, Ethan sat at his kitchen table with a notepad and wrote down everything he could remember about Craig. Every interaction, every incident, every time he'd seen something that didn't sit right. If Vance wanted to make this a fight, Ethan would be ready. His phone rang at 9 p.m. Detective Morrison. "Mr. Cole, I'm calling to inform you that we're adding witness intimidation to Craig's charges. His attorney's visit to the diner today violated the no-contact order. It's all documented, and the judge is not happy." "So what happens now?" "Craig's bail is being revoked. He'll be back in custody by morning." Morrison's voice carried satisfaction. "He keeps making this worse for himself. The judge specifically said that using his attorney as a proxy to threaten witnesses shows consciousness of guilt and contempt for the legal process." After they hung up, Ethan felt a weight lift from his shoulders. Craig would be back in jail. No more worrying about him showing up at the apartment or the diner. No more looking over his shoulder. He texted Walter. "Morrison says Craig's going back to jail." The response came immediately. "Good. Now we can focus on building something better." The next 2 weeks were a whirlwind of positive change. With the new suppliers, the food quality soared. Reviews started appearing online praising the Riverside Griddle's transformation. A food blogger from Cincinnati Magazine came in and wrote a glowing piece about the diner's commitment to local ingredients and community. "I've been eating at the Griddle for years," the article read, "but something has shifted. The food is exceptional now, the service warm and genuine, and there's a sense of pride in the place that I hadn't noticed before. Whatever management changes happen behind the scenes, they're working." But business increased 20%, then 30%. Walter authorized raises for all staff, and Ethan spent hours creating a new scheduling system that gave everyone more predictable hours and better work-life balance. "This is how it should be," Walter said, reviewing the changes. "When you take care of your people, they take care of your business." But the best moment came 3 weeks after Craig's arrest. Ethan was in the office reviewing invoices when Patricia called. "I finished the full audit. The total theft over 2 years was $273,000. The number was staggering. Ethan had to ask her to repeat it. "How is that even possible?" "Small amounts constantly, across multiple schemes, all adding up. The DA is charging him with grand theft, multiple counts of fraud, and the ghost employee scheme pushed it into federal territory. The FBI is now involved." Patricia's voice was grim. "Craig Dalton isn't getting out of this, Ethan. His attorney knows it too. They're trying to negotiate a plea, but the DA is offering 15 years minimum. In prison, not jail." 15 years. Craig was 43. He'd be almost 60 when he got out, if he got out. His life as he knew it was over. Ethan should have felt triumph, victory, justice. Instead, he felt something more complicated, a mixture of satisfaction and sadness. Craig had done this to himself, but still, a life ruined felt heavy. "Thank you for all your work, Patricia." "Just doing my job." "But Ethan, you did good. A lot of people would have looked the other way, told themselves it wasn't their problem. You didn't. That matters." That evening, Walter invited Ethan and Mason to his home in Columbus for dinner. The house was beautiful, a historic Victorian in a quiet neighborhood, filled with books and art and the accumulated treasures of a long life. Mason was entranced, running from room to room with barely contained energy. "Daddy, there's a library, a whole room just for books." "Inside voice, buddy," Ethan called, but he was smiling. Walter had prepared dinner himself, pot roast with vegetables, homemade rolls, and apple pie for dessert. They ate in a dining room with a chandelier that probably cost more than Ethan's truck, But the conversation was comfortable, easy. Mason, your father tells me you're interested in dinosaurs, Walter said. Mason's face lit up. I love dinosaurs. Did you know that velociraptors were actually only about the size of a turkey, but they hunted in packs so they could take down much bigger prey? And that T-Rex had the strongest bite force of any land animal ever? I didn't know that. Tell me more. For the next 20 minutes, Mason held forth on Mesozoic fauna while Walter listened with genuine interest, asking questions that spurred even more enthusiastic explanations. Watching them, Ethan felt his throat tighten. Mason had been too young when Sarah died to remember having grandparents who doted on him. Ethan's own parents had passed before Mason was born, and Sarah's family had never been close. But here was Walter, this unexpected blessing, giving his son the attention and interest every kid deserved. After Mason finally wound down and went to explore the library with Walter's permission, Walter turned to Ethan. I have something for you. He pulled out an envelope and slid it across the table. Open it. Inside was a check. Ethan looked at the amount and nearly dropped it. $50,000. Walter, I can't. It's your share of the recovered money. Patricia was able to trace a lot of what Craig stole through his bank accounts. The DA seized his assets, and after legal fees, there's about $200,000 to be returned to the business. As 20% owner, $40,000 is yours. I added 10 as a bonus for everything you've done. This is too much. It's what you've earned. And Ethan, I want you to use it. Buy a reliable car, move to a better apartment, take Mason somewhere fun, build the life you deserve. Ethan stared at the check, his vision blurring. $50,000. It was more money than he'd ever seen in one place, enough to change everything. Thank you, he managed. Walter, I don't know how to... You already thanked me. 3 weeks ago, in a rainstorm, when you stopped and helped a stranger. Walter smiled. Everything since then has just been the universe balancing the scales. On the drive home, with Mason asleep in the back seat and the check in Ethan's wallet, he thought about the past month, about how one decision, one moment of choosing compassion over convenience, had cascaded into this new reality. Craig arrested and awaiting trial. The diner thriving, his own future secure in ways he'd never imagined possible. He pulled into his apartment complex and sat for a moment, looking up at the building that had been home for 3 years. Soon, he'd be able to leave. To find somewhere nicer, safer, with a yard where Mason could play. But tonight, this place felt like a palace. Because tonight, for the first time since Sarah died, Ethan felt like he could breathe without the weight of financial terror crushing his chest. He carried Mason upstairs, tucked him into bed, and sat in his living room staring at the check. $50,000. A new beginning. A reward for doing the right thing. His phone buzzed with a text from Walter. Sleep well, partner. Tomorrow we start planning the future. Ethan smiled in the darkness. The future. For so long, he'd only been able to think about surviving the next day, the next week, the next month. But now, impossibly, wonderfully, he had a future worth planning. And it all started with stopping for a stranger in the rain. 6 months had passed since that rainy night when Ethan pulled over for a stranger, and the world looked completely different now. The Riverside Griddle hummed with life on this particular Saturday morning, every booth filled, the air rich with the smell of Miguel's cooking and the sound of easy laughter. Ethan moved through the dining room with practiced grace, greeting regulars by name, checking on new customers, his movements confident in a way they'd never been when he was just a server trying to survive Craig's cruelty. He wore better shoes now, real leather, no holes, and the weight of constant financial terror had lifted from his shoulders, like a stone he'd been carrying for so long he'd forgotten what it felt like to stand up straight. The check from Walter had changed everything. A reliable car sat in the parking lot, a Honda Accord with working heat and functioning wipers. And just last month, he and Mason had moved into a 2-bedroom apartment with a small yard where Mason could dig for fossils to his heart's content. But the best changes weren't the material ones. They were in the faces of his staff, in the way Jenny smiled genuinely now, instead of wearing that tired mask of forced cheer. In how Miguel experimented with new recipes, knowing his creativity would be celebrated rather than shut down. In the atmosphere of the diner itself, which had transformed from a place of fear and tension into something that felt like family. Walter sat in his usual corner booth, laptop open, reviewing the plans for the second location they were scouting in Covington. He'd been splitting his time between Columbus and Cincinnati, and last month had joked about just moving permanently. "I'm here more than I'm home anyway," he'd said, "and the coffee's better." The bell chimed and Detective Morrison walked in, out of uniform for once, wearing jeans and a casual jacket. She'd become something of a regular since Craig's case had wrapped up. She caught Ethan's eye and gestured to an empty booth. "Morning, Detective," Ethan said, sliding a menu across to her. "Your usual?" "Please, and I told you, when I'm not working, it's just Rebecca." She smiled, but there was something in her expression that made Ethan pause. "Everything okay?" "That's what I came to talk to you about. Craig's sentencing is Monday. Thought you'd want to know." The name still sent a jolt through Ethan's system, though the fear had faded to something more like residual anxiety. Craig had taken a plea deal 2 months ago, 12 years in federal prison with possibility of parole after 8. The trial Vance had threatened never materialized because the evidence was simply too overwhelming. 12 years, Ethan said quietly. That's really happening. The judge could reduce it, but given the amount stolen and the systematic nature of the fraud, I doubt it. Rebecca leaned forward. The DA wanted me to ask if you wanted to give a victim impact statement. You're not required to, but the judge will hear it if you do. Ethan's first instinct was to say no. The idea of standing in a courtroom reading a statement while Craig sat there watching made his stomach clench. But then he thought about Jenny's face when Craig had humiliated her for a small mistake, about the night shifts Marcus had worked because Craig scheduled him punitively, about his own 3 years of walking on eggshells and swallowing his dignity. I'll do it, he said. Someone should speak for everyone he hurt. Rebecca nodded approvingly. I think that's the right choice. You have until Monday morning to write it. Keep it focused on the impact of his actions, not on attacking him personally. The facts speak for themselves. After she left with her breakfast order, Ethan found Walter watching him with concern. You sure you want to do this? Walter asked. No one would blame you if you wanted to just let it be over. I'm sure. Besides, I think I need to. For closure, you know? Ethan refilled Walter's coffee. 3 years he made me feel small. Made all of us feel small. Maybe this is my chance to take that power back. Then I'll be there with you. You won't face him alone. That evening, after Mason was asleep in his new bedroom, complete with glow-in-the-dark dinosaur stickers on the ceiling, Ethan sat at his kitchen table with a blank piece of paper and a pen. Writing had never been his strong suit, but he needed to find the words. He started, crossed it out, started again. After an hour, he had something that felt true. The weekend passed in a blur of work and nervous energy. Sunday night, Ethan barely slept, his mind churning through the next day's events. When his alarm went off at 6 a.m., he felt like he'd been awake for hours. He dressed carefully in the one suit he owned, bought specifically for this occasion with money from his bonus. It was a simple gray suit, nothing fancy, but it fit him properly and made him look like someone who deserved to be taken seriously. He studied himself in the mirror and barely recognized the man staring back. 6 months ago, he'd been exhausted and defeated. Now he looked like someone who'd survived something and come out stronger. Mrs. Chen came over to watch Mason, who was confused about why his dad was wearing a suit on a Monday. I have to go to court today, buddy, Ethan explained, kneeling down to his son's level. Remember the man I told you about who was doing bad things at work? Mason nodded solemnly. The mean manager. Right. Well, today the judge decides what happens to him, and I'm going to tell the judge how his actions hurt people. Like a witness statement, Mason said confidently. We learned about the justice system in school. Are you nervous? A little bit. You'll do great, Daddy. Just tell the truth. That's what Mrs. Patterson says is most important. Mason hugged him fiercely. I'm proud of you. Ethan's eyes burned. His 6-year-old son was proud of him. He held Mason close for a long moment, drawing strength from the embrace. The courthouse was an imposing building downtown, all marble and columns and the weight of law. Walter was waiting on the steps, wearing an expensive suit that made Ethan's off-the-rack purchase look shabby by comparison. But when Walter smiled and clasped his shoulder, Ethan felt steadied. "Ready?" Walter asked. "As I'll ever be." They went through security and made their way to courtroom 4B on the third floor. Rebecca Morrison was there, along with DA Rebecca Foster, whose sharp eyes softened when she saw Ethan. "Good morning," Foster said. "The hearing starts at 9. Craig will be brought in from holding. You'll sit with us, and when the judge asks for victim impact statements, I'll call you up. You'll have about 5 minutes. Just read what you've prepared, speak clearly, and remember, you're speaking truth to power. That's all you need to do." The courtroom filled slowly. Ethan recognized some faces: Patricia the accountant, a few people from the bank where the deposits had been made, Craig's attorney Richard Vance looking resigned and tired. And then, in the back row, he spotted Jenny, Miguel, Tina, and Marcus. They'd all taken the morning off to be here. Jenny caught his eye and mouthed, "We've got you." At 9:03, a side door opened and Craig was led in wearing an orange jumpsuit and handcuffs. He'd lost weight, Ethan noticed. His face was gaunt, and his eyes had a hollow quality that suggested the past 6 months in custody had not been kind. For just a moment, their eyes met across the courtroom, and Ethan saw something flash in Craig's expression. Not the hatred from that day at the diner, but something sadder. Defeat, maybe. The recognition that this was really the end. Then Craig looked away, and the moment passed. "All rise," the bailiff intoned. "The Honorable Judge Patricia Williams presiding." Judge Williams was a black woman in her 60s with steel gray hair and an expression that suggested she'd heard every excuse and seen every manipulation tactic in the book. She took her seat and surveyed the courtroom with eyes that missed nothing. "Good morning. We're here for the sentencing of Craig Michael Dalton, who has pleaded guilty to charges of embezzlement, wire fraud, filing false tax returns, and theft in excess of $200,000. She looked down at the papers before her. "Mr. Dalton, please stand." Craig stood shakily, his attorney rising beside him. "Before I pass sentence, I'm going to hear from several people. First, I understand the victims wish to make statements. Ms. Foster." Foster stood. "Yes, Your Honor. Ethan Cole, co-owner of Riverside Griddle Diner, would like to address the court." "Mr. Cole, please come forward." Ethan's legs felt like jelly as he walked to the podium. His prepared statement trembled in his hands. The courtroom was silent except for the sound of his footsteps. He looked up at Judge Williams, who nodded encouragingly. Then he began to read. "Your Honor, my name is Ethan Cole. I worked under Craig Dalton for 3 years before he was arrested for stealing from the business I now help manage. I'm here today not just for myself, but for every employee who suffered under his management." Ethan's voice grew stronger as he continued. "Craig didn't just steal money. He stole dignity. He created an atmosphere of fear where good people were afraid to speak up, where asking for time off to care for sick children was met with retaliation, where working hard was never enough because he would always find something to criticize. I watched him humiliate coworkers in front of customers. I experienced it myself when he fired me publicly, mocking my situation as a single father trying to provide for my son." He glanced at Craig, who was staring at the table in front of him. "For 3 years, I walked into work afraid. Afraid I'd be late because my truck was dying and I couldn't afford to fix it. Afraid I'd make a mistake and lose the job I desperately needed. Afraid that no matter how hard I worked, it would never be good enough. And all the while, Craig was stealing thousands of dollars, money that could have gone to better wages, better benefits, a better workplace for everyone." Ethan's hands had stopped shaking. The words were flowing now, years of suppressed anger and hurt finding voice. "When we discovered the theft, I felt betrayed. We all did." He'd positioned himself as the responsible one, the person holding everything together while secretly robbing us blind. He stole $273,000 over 2 years. That money represents lost opportunities for every single person who worked at that diner, raises we didn't get, equipment that didn't get replaced, the security we didn't have. He took a breath. "But Your Honor, the financial theft isn't even the worst part. The worst part is how he made us feel worthless while he enriched himself. How he created a toxic environment where fear was the primary emotion. how he damaged people's confidence and self-worth systematically and deliberately. Ethan looked directly at Craig now, whose head was still bowed. Since Craig's arrest, the Riverside Griddle has transformed. Our staff is happier, more confident, more creative. Our business is thriving, and every single one of us comes to work without that knot of anxiety in our stomachs. The difference is night and day, and it shows me just how much damage one cruel person can do, and how much healing is possible when they're removed. He returned his gaze to Judge Williams. I don't say this out of vindictiveness, but out of honest assessment. Craig Dalton should not be in a position of authority over people for a very long time. He abused that authority systematically. He hurt people who trusted him. And he did it all while smiling and pretending to care. Whatever sentence you choose, I hope it reflects not just the financial crimes, but the human cost of his actions. Thank you. The silence that followed felt profound. Ethan returned to his seat on shaking legs. Walter gripped his hand briefly, squeezing hard. Judge Williams made a note, then looked up. Thank you, Mr. Cole. That was powerful testimony. Are there other statements? Jenny stood and walked forward. She was nervous. Ethan could see her hands trembling, but her voice was clear. Your Honor, I worked under Craig Dalton for 2 years. He once made me cry in front of a full dining room because I forgot to refill a customer's water glass. He called me incompetent and stupid and said if I couldn't handle basic tasks, I should work somewhere easier, like a gas station. I was 18 years old. I almost quit that day. The only reason I didn't was because I needed the money for college. She swallowed hard. Craig made the workplace toxic. He pitted us against each other, made us compete for the better sections, used favoritism as a weapon. I watched him destroy people's confidence systematically, and now I know he was stealing the whole time, which makes everything so much worse. We were struggling while he was getting rich off our labor. I'm glad he got caught. I'm glad he has to face consequences. Thank you. Miguel went next, his statement brief but impactful. Craig Dalton told me my food was barely adequate. He rejected menu ideas, killed my creativity, and made me feel like just a cook, not a chef. Since he's been gone, I've been able to actually contribute. The diner's success right now is because we're finally being treated like professionals who have something to offer. He held us back, stole from us, and lied to us. He deserves every year of the sentence he's getting. After the victim statements concluded, Craig's attorney stood. Your Honor, my client wishes to address the court. Judge Williams looked surprised. Mr. Dalton, you wish to speak? Craig stood slowly. When he spoke, his voice was rough, barely above a whisper. Yes, Your Honor. I need to say something. Go ahead. Craig turned to face Ethan and the others. His face was pale, his eyes red-rimmed. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't even know if I deserve the chance to apologize. But I need to say this. He swallowed hard. Everything you all said is true. Every word. I was cruel. I stole. I created a toxic environment. And I did it all while telling myself I deserved it, that I was smarter than everyone else, that the rules didn't apply to me. His voice cracked. Ethan, you saved a man's life in a storm. You showed kindness when you were exhausted and had every reason to just keep driving. And I responded by trying to destroy you. I fired you publicly because seeing you be decent made me feel small, because your goodness highlighted how rotten I'd become. Craig wiped his eyes roughly. I wish I could take it all back. The theft, the cruelty, all of it. But I can't. All I can do is tell you that these 6 months in custody have given me a lot of time to think about the person I became, and I'm ashamed. I'm so deeply ashamed. He turned back to Judge Williams. Your Honor, I know I'm going to prison. I know I deserve it. I just want to say for the record that the people at that diner are good people. They deserved better than me. And whatever Mr. Cole has done since taking over proves that. The success they're having now is what should have been happening all along. I was the problem. And I'm sorry. He sat down heavily, his shoulders shaking. The courtroom was silent. Judge Williams studied Craig for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then she looked at the papers before her. Mr. Dalton, I've reviewed your case extensively. The financial crimes alone would warrant significant prison time. But what struck me most in reading the pre-sentencing reports was the pattern of abuse and manipulation. You weren't just an embezzler. You were a tyrant who created a culture of fear while stealing from the very people you terrorized. She leaned forward. Your apology just now seemed genuine, and I appreciate that you didn't make excuses. But apologies don't erase harm. They're a starting point, not an ending point. The question before me is what sentence will serve justice while also allowing for the possibility of rehabilitation. Judge Williams picked up her gavel. Craig Michael Dalton, you are hereby sentenced to 12 years in federal prison on the combined charges. You will be eligible for parole after serving 8 years, contingent on good behavior and demonstrated rehabilitation. Additionally, you are ordered to pay full restitution of $273,000 to Riverside Griddle Diner, with a payment plan to be established upon your release. The gavel came down with a sharp crack. This court is adjourned. It was over. Just like that, years of fear and abuse and theft ended with the sound of wood on wood. Ethan sat frozen as Craig was led away, the orange jumpsuit disappearing through the side door. He'd expected to feel triumphant, vindicated, satisfied. Instead, he felt something more complicated. Relief, yes, but also a kind of sadness for the waste of it all. Craig could have been a good manager, could have built people up instead of tearing them down, could have had a completely different life. But he'd chosen cruelty and greed, and now he'd spend the next 8 to 12 years paying for those choices. Walter's hand on his shoulder brought him back. You did well. You spoke truth, and you did it with dignity. Your wife would be proud. The mention of Sarah made Ethan's throat tight. He nodded, not trusting his voice. Outside the courthouse, the staff from the diner was waiting. Jenny hugged him immediately, followed by Miguel, Tina, and Marcus. They stood in a small circle in the spring sunshine, no one quite knowing what to say. Finally, Miguel broke the silence. So that's it? It's really over? It's really over, Ethan confirmed. He's going to prison. We can move forward without looking over our shoulders. I kind of felt bad for him at the end, Jenny admitted. When he apologized, he seemed genuine. Maybe he was, Ethan said. Maybe he finally realized what he'd done. But genuine remorse doesn't erase the harm. It's just the first step toward maybe becoming a better person someday. They talked for a few more minutes, then drifted off toward their cars. The diner was in good hands with the lunch crew, but they'd all want to get back soon. This was their workplace now, their community, and it needed them. Walter suggested lunch at a nice restaurant to decompress, but Ethan shook his head. I need to pick up Mason from school. It's early release today, and I promised him we'd go to the Natural History Museum. He's been asking for weeks. Go, Walter said. Spend time with your son. We'll talk tomorrow about the Covington location. Ethan drove to Mason's school in his reliable Honda, marveling as he always did at the simple luxury of a car that started every time and had heat that actually worked. He was 10 minutes early, so he sat in the pickup line and let himself process everything that had happened. 12 years. Craig would be 55 when he got out, if he served the full sentence. His career in food service was over. No one would hire a convicted embezzler to manage their money. His life as he'd known it was finished, and Ethan's life was better than it had ever been. The irony wasn't lost on him. One rainy night, one decision to stop and help a stranger, and the trajectory of his entire existence had changed. If he'd driven past Walter that night, Craig would still be stealing, the diner would still be toxic, and Ethan would still be scraping by on tips and living in constant fear. But he had stopped. He'd chosen compassion over convenience, and that choice had rippled outward in ways he never could have imagined. Mason came running out of the school building, his dinosaur backpack bouncing, his face lit up with joy. Daddy! Did you do the court thing? How was it? It went well, buddy. Justice was served. Ethan ruffled his son's hair as Mason climbed into the back seat. Ready to go see some fossils? So ready. Did you know the museum just got a new Triceratops skull? A real one, not a cast. Mrs. Patterson told me it's like 65 million years old. As they drove toward the museum, Mason chattered about dinosaurs and school and a kid named Tyler who claimed his dad could do a backflip, but Mason was skeptical. Ethan listened with half his attention, while the other half marveled at how normal this felt. How routine. Just a father and son heading to a museum on a Monday afternoon, no financial crisis looming, no fear of being fired, just life. Regular, beautiful, ordinary life. The museum was quiet on a weekday afternoon. They had the dinosaur hall almost to themselves. Mason pressed his face against the glass cases, reading every placard with intense concentration, asking questions faster than Ethan could answer them. "Daddy, look at the size of those teeth. A T-Rex could eat a whole person in like 2 bites. And did you know they probably had feathers, at least when they were babies?" Ethan smiled, letting Mason's enthusiasm wash over him. This was what mattered, not courtrooms or sentencing or justice, important as those things were. This, a child's wonder. The luxury of spending a Monday afternoon in a museum instead of working 3 jobs. The simple joy of being present. His phone buzzed. A text from Walter. "The Covington location came through. We signed papers Friday. You're going to be a restaurant owner in 2 cities. Congratulations, partner." Ethan stared at the message. 2 locations, a real business, a real future. 6 months ago, it would have seemed like a fantasy. Now it was reality. "Daddy, are you listening? I asked if we could get a book from the gift shop about the Cretaceous period." "Sure, buddy. Let's see what they have." They left the museum an hour later, Mason clutching a book about dinosaurs and chattering about starting his own fossil collection. On the drive home, Mason suddenly went quiet. "Daddy, can I ask you something?" "Of course." "That night when you helped Mr. Walter, the night it was raining really hard, did you know it would turn out like this? Did you know he'd help us back?" Ethan thought about how to answer. "No, buddy, I had no idea. I just saw someone who needed help, and I stopped." "But you were tired, and you wanted to come home to me. Mrs. Chen told me. So why did you stop?" "Because it was the right thing to do. Because I thought about your mom and how someone stopped for her that night when she had her accident, and I thought maybe if I helped someone else, it would be like paying back that kindness." Mason considered this. "Mrs. Patterson says that's called karma. When you do good things come back to you." "Maybe. Or maybe it's just that kindness matters. It ripples out, like when you throw a rock in a pond. You help one person, and they help someone else, and it spreads." "I want to be like that," Mason said seriously. "I want to be someone who stops to help." Ethan's eyes burned. "You already are, buddy. You already are." That evening, after Mason was asleep, Ethan sat on his small balcony with a beer and called Walter. "How are you feeling?" Walter asked. "Today was heavy." "I'm okay. It feels good to have closure, to know that chapter is really finished." Ethan took a sip of his beer. "Craig apologized. In court. I think he meant it. Does that change anything for you?" "I don't know. I'm glad he has regrets. I'm glad he's taking responsibility, but it doesn't erase what he did. I think I can accept his apology while still being glad he's facing consequences. Those 2 things don't have to be in conflict. That's very mature of you. Or maybe I'm just tired of being angry. Anger's exhausting. I'd rather focus on building something good than dwelling on the bad that came before." Ethan paused. "Speaking of building, 2 locations, Walter. Are we really doing this?" "We're really doing this. The Covington space is perfect. Similar vibe to the Riverside, good neighborhood, and the rent is reasonable. We'll need to hire a manager to run it, but I think with the systems we've built, we can replicate the success." They talked for another hour about plans and logistics and dreams. When they finally hung up, Ethan sat in the darkness and let himself feel the full weight of how far he'd come. 6 months ago, he'd been a server living paycheck to paycheck, one emergency away from disaster. Now he was a business owner planning expansion, with money in the bank and a future that looked bright, all because he'd stopped in the rain. The next few months were a whirlwind of activity. The Covington location opened to great fanfare, with a menu that featured the same local suppliers and commitment to quality that had made the Cincinnati location successful. They hired a manager named Sarah, a coincidence that made Ethan's chest tight when he first heard her name, who'd been working in restaurant management for 15 years and was thrilled to join a business that actually valued its employees. The original Riverside Griddle continued to thrive. They'd become a destination, featured in local publications and food blogs. People came from across the city to taste Miguel's creations and experience the warm, genuine atmosphere that Walter and Ethan had cultivated. One evening in late summer, almost a year to the day since that rainy night, Ethan was closing up the diner when he noticed someone standing outside looking in. An older woman, maybe 60, with gray hair and an uncertain expression. He opened the door. "Can I help you?" "Are you Ethan Cole?" she asked. "Yes." "I'm Margaret Dalton, Craig's mother." She swallowed hard. "I know I have no right to ask, but could I speak with you for a moment?" Ethan's first instinct was to say no, to protect himself from whatever she might say. But something in her face, the same exhausted defeat he'd seen in Craig's expression at sentencing, made him pause. "Come in," he said, gesturing to a booth. They sat across from each other. Margaret's hands were clasped tightly on the table. "I wanted to apologize. For my son. For what he did to you and everyone else here." "You don't need to apologize for him." "I know, but I'm his mother. I raised him to be better than what he became, and I failed." Her voice cracked. "I've been visiting him in prison. He talks about you sometimes, about how you were always kind, always worked hard, and how he resented you for it. How seeing someone be decent made him feel like a fraud." "Mrs. Dalton, please let me finish." She took a shaky breath. "He's changed in prison, really changed. He's taking classes, working in the prison kitchen, talking to a therapist. He says he's trying to become the person he should have been all along. I don't know if that makes any difference to you. I don't know if you care. But I thought you should know." Ethan was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "I'm glad he's working on himself. I genuinely am. What he did was terrible, but that doesn't mean he can't become better." "I hope he does." Margaret's eyes filled with tears. "Thank you. You didn't have to say that." "I mean it. I'm not glad he's suffering. I'm glad he's facing consequences and hopefully learning from them. Those are different things." After Margaret left, Ethan sat alone in the empty diner and thought about redemption, about how people could change or try to, even after doing terrible things, about how justice and compassion didn't have to be enemies. He locked up and drove home through streets he knew by heart now, in a car that never broke down, to an apartment where his son slept peacefully. And he thought about the night that changed everything. 2 years later, Ethan stood in the parking lot of the Riverside Griddle on a warm spring evening. The diner had just been featured in a National Food Magazine article about locally sourced restaurants changing their communities. Walter stood beside him, older now, but still sharp, still engaged, still Ethan's partner in every sense of the word. "3 locations," Walter said, looking at the diner with satisfaction. "The third one in Dayton opens next month. Who would have thought?" "You did," Ethan said. "You saw potential where I saw impossibility. I saw a good man who needed a chance. Everything else followed from that." They stood in comfortable silence, watching the evening crowd through the windows. The staff moved with practiced efficiency, smiling and engaged. Customers laughed over their meals. It was exactly what a neighborhood diner should be. "I got a letter," Ethan said suddenly. "From Craig. His parole hearing is next month. How do you feel about that?" "Honestly, I hope he gets it. He's served 4 years. If he's really changed, if he's done the work, then he deserves a second chance." Ethan paused. "I wrote a letter to the parole board, supporting his release." Walter looked surprised. "You did?" "I did. Because I believe in redemption. I believe people can change, and because holding on to anger was poisoning me more than it was hurting him." Ethan smiled. "Besides, I learned something important from all this." "What's that?" "That kindness isn't naive. It's not weakness. It's actually the strongest thing we can do. When I stopped for you that night, I was choosing to believe the world could be better. And it was. It is. But only because people make it that way, one choice at a time." Walter's eyes were suspiciously bright. "Your wife would be so proud of the man you've become, the father you are, the leader you've grown into." "I hope so. I try to live in a way that would make her proud, that would make Mason proud when he's older, and understands everything that happened." Speaking of Mason, he was 9 now, still obsessed with dinosaurs, but also developing an interest in cooking. He spent Saturday mornings in the diner kitchen with Miguel, learning how to crack eggs and flip pancakes. Last week, he'd announced he wanted to be a paleontologist chef when he grew up, Someone who could discover fossils and make excellent omelets. Ethan wouldn't bet against him. A car pulled into the parking lot, driving slowly, as if the driver was uncertain. It stopped at the far end and an older man got out. Even from a distance, Ethan could see his hands shaking as he approached. "Ethan Cole?" the man called out hesitantly. "Yes?" The man came closer, and Ethan noticed his worn jacket, his threadbare shoes, the kind of exhaustion that came from too many hard years. "My car broke down about a mile back. I don't have money for a tow, and I need to get to Columbus tonight. My daughter's in the hospital. She's having surgery tomorrow, and—" His voice broke. "I'm sorry to bother you. I saw your lights and thought maybe I could use a phone, or if you knew a church nearby that might help. I don't know what else to do." Ethan looked at the man, really looked at him, saw the desperation, the fear, the same kind of helplessness he'd seen in Walter's face that rainy night 2 years ago. Saw himself in the not-so-distant past, one emergency away from disaster. He pulled out his phone and called his mechanic. "Hey Dave, I've got someone who needs a tow and a repair. Can you help him out tonight? I'll cover the cost." He listened for a moment. "Great. Thanks." Turning to the man, Ethan said, "The mechanic will be here in 20 minutes. And here," he pulled out his wallet and extracted several bills. "This should cover gas to Columbus and maybe a meal. Get to your daughter." The man stared at the money, tears streaming down his face. "I can't. This is too much. How can I repay you?" "You don't need to repay me. Just do the same for someone else someday when you can." Ethan smiled. "And while you wait for the tow truck, come inside. We'll get you something to eat." As they walked toward the diner entrance, Walter hung back, watching with an expression of profound satisfaction. Ethan caught his eye and grinned. "What?" Ethan asked. "Nothing. Just thinking about how circles close, how kindness perpetuates kindness, how one good act can ripple outward forever." Walter put a hand on Ethan's shoulder as they reached the door. "You're doing exactly what you should be doing, living proof that goodness isn't weakness, it's power." Inside, the diner hummed with life and warmth and the smell of good food cooked with care. Ethan got the stranded man settled in a booth with a hot meal, made sure Dave the mechanic had the right location, and then returned to work. It was just another evening at the Riverside Griddle, just another night of serving food and helping people and building community one interaction at a time. But it was also everything. It was the culmination of every choice Ethan had made since that rainy night, every moment of choosing compassion over convenience, every time he'd stopped when he could have driven past. Later, after the diner closed and the stranger's car was towed and everyone had gone home, Ethan stood alone in the parking lot one more time. The neon sign buzzed quietly above him, painting everything in warm light. He thought about Craig, hopefully getting paroled, getting a second chance to build a better life. He thought about Walter, who'd become the father figure and mentor and friend Ethan had never known he needed. He thought about his staff, thriving in an environment where they were valued. He thought about the stranger tonight who'd get to his daughter's bedside because someone stopped to help. And he thought about Sarah, wherever she was, hoping she could see what their son was becoming, what her husband had built from the ashes of grief and struggle. "Thank you," Ethan whispered to the night, to his late wife, to the universe, to whatever force had conspired to put him on that road on that rainy night. "Thank you for teaching me that one moment of kindness can change everything." He locked the diner, climbed into his reliable car, and drove home through streets that felt like they belonged to him now. Not because he owned them, but because he'd learned to move through the world with open hands and an open heart, ready to help, ready to receive help, ready to build something better than what came before. When he arrived home, Mason was still awake, sitting at the kitchen table with an elaborate dinosaur diorama spread out before him. "Daddy, look! I made the Cretaceous-Paleogene extinction event. See the asteroid?" He pointed excitedly at a painted rock suspended over plastic dinosaurs. Ethan sat down beside his son and admired the diorama. "This is amazing, buddy. You worked really hard on this." "Mrs. Chen helped with the volcano, and Mr. Walter sent me this special paint that glows in the dark for the lava." Mason beamed. "I'm going to present it at the science fair next week." "You'll do great. Mason was quiet for a moment, then said, "Daddy, you know how you always tell me to be kind, to help people even when it's hard?" "Yes." "Today at school, there was this kid, Tommy, and some other kids were being mean to him because he's new and talks funny. And I remembered what you said about standing up for people. So I sat with him at lunch and asked him about where he moved from, and now we're friends." Mason looked up at Ethan with serious eyes. "Was that the right thing?" Ethan pulled his son close, his heart so full it ached. "That was exactly the right thing. I'm so proud of you." "Because kindness matters, right? Like you and Mr. Walter always say. It ripples out." "It ripples out," Ethan agreed. "Just like throwing a rock in a pond. You never know how far the waves will go." That night after Mason was asleep, Ethan sat on his balcony one more time, looking out at the city lights. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. The date and location to finalize, staff to hire, problems to solve. But tonight, he let himself simply be grateful. Grateful for one rainy night and one stranger who needed help. Grateful for every choice that followed. Grateful for second chances and new beginnings, and the mysterious ways the universe balanced the scales. And as he sat there in the darkness, Ethan understood with perfect clarity that his life's greatest achievement wasn't the thriving business or the financial security or the respect he'd earned. It was teaching his son, through actions more than words, that kindness wasn't naive or weak or foolish. It was the most powerful force in the world, the force that turned strangers into family, disasters into opportunities, and ordinary moments into miracles. All you had to do was stop, see someone in need, and choose to help. Everything else would follow.